Welcome to Haven Stories channel. Before we jump into our next thrilling story, take a moment to drop a comment and share what time it is where you're watching from. I'd love to see where everyone's tuning in across the world. I've always believed that the woods carry memories, not just the kind you or I hold on to, but something deeper, echoes that outlast every season, every storm, every life that passes through. That's what drew me time and time again to camping in the thick of America's forests. It wasn't the comfort of an RV, though I had one. It wasn't even the silence. It was that strange in-between feeling as though the world was watching you back. When I pulled into that campground in northern Pennsylvania, I felt it again, a pressure at the edges of my chest. Nothing that shouted danger, just a quiet hum of unease, like a memory I'd forgotten but should have remembered. The place was nearly empty, late September air thinning out the casual campers. My partner Elena had wanted to stay closer to the interstate, but I insisted. I told her the woods would be good for us. A reset. We parked the RV beneath towering maples and oaks, their leaves halfway to fire. The air smelled of damp earth, pine sap, and the faint smoke of someone's distant fire. At first, it was everything I'd promised. The kind of place where you breathe deeper, let the static of your life dissolve. Alina laughed when she found a raccoon pawing at our cooler, and I teased her when she jumped at a barred owl's call. Normal campground moments. But that first night, I noticed it. The trees. When we'd arrived, they'd stood tall and distant, the canopy letting shards of sunlight paint the RV's roof. But as I sat outside after Alina went to bed, I felt them leaning. Not literally bending toward me, not in any way that could be photographed or proven, but leaning. Their silhouettes pressed closer in the dark. My rational mind said it was just the way shadows play, the way night shrinks space. But in my chest, I knew something had shifted. I didn't mention it to Alina. She already thought I obsessed too much over details in the woods. She said I let my imagination ruin the peace of camping. Maybe she was right. Maybe. The second night, the feeling deepened. We'd spent the day hiking a nearby trail, following the map handed out at the entrance station. But when dusk fell, I realized how easily that trail could confuse someone. Paths that should have met at right angles bent into shallow curves. Trees marked with blazes seemed to shift places when you looked back over your shoulder. We laughed it off at the time, blamed it on being tired. But later, sitting outside by the fire, I couldn't laugh. The trees had closed in tighter. The edge of the clearing where our RV sat felt smaller, the trunks pressing nearer, like onlookers edging forward during a performance. I told myself it was the firelight, the way flames make shadows crawl. Still, my chair felt too close to the tree line, so I dragged it back toward the RV. Elena teased me again. She said maybe I'd had too much whiskey. I didn't tell her I hadn't had a sip. The third night broke something open. A storm was moving in, the kind that rattles leaves long before rain arrives. The wind made the branches groan overhead. I lay in bed listening to them scrape across each other, and that's when I heard it. Knocks. At first soft, then sharper. Not the irregular snapping of wood and wind, but deliberate taps. 3 in a row, then silence. Then again from another side of the RV. Elena stirred beside me, half asleep, and asked if I'd heard it. I said it was just the storm, but even as I said it, my tongue felt heavy with the lie. I stayed awake long after she drifted back to sleep, listening. The knocks circled us like footsteps, not fast. Patient, testing. The rain never came. By morning, I was convinced it had been my mind inventing patterns in the sounds. But when I stepped outside, the ground told a different story. Around the RV, pressed into the damp soil, were indentations. Not boot prints, not paws, something between. Long, narrow, like stretched fingers pressed into mud. I crouched, touched one, and felt how deep it went. Whatever had stood there had weight. Elena came out with her coffee, yawning, and asked what I was looking at. I smoothed the dirt with my shoe before she could see. Nothing, I told her. Just checking the ground after the storm. She shrugged and I forced myself to smile. But inside, a quiet dread was blooming. That night, I couldn't keep the secret. We sat by the fire again, the woods whispering around us, and I told Elena how the trees felt closer, how I swore they weren't standing where they had been when we arrived. She frowned, tried to laugh, but I could see the unease flicker across her face too. She admitted she'd noticed the trail markers looking different, the same way I had. She admitted the knocks hadn't sounded like wind. For the first time since arriving, I saw fear in her eyes. We argued quietly, whether to pack up and leave early, whether we were letting our nerves dictate the trip. I wanted to stay, to prove to myself that I wasn't unraveling. Elena wanted to go, but she didn't want to drive through the mountains in the dark, so we compromised. One more night, then we'd leave at first light. I tried to believe that would fix everything, but the woods had other plans. That final night, I woke to silence. No wind, no insects, just a stillness so heavy it pressed against my eardrums. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked toward the small window above our bed. The trees were there, closer than ever. Branches brushed against the glass, though they hadn't been near enough before. And then, faintly, from just beyond that glass, 3 knocks. I froze, staring at the window. The sound hadn't echoed like a branch flicking against the glass. It had weight, intent. I held my breath, hoping Elena hadn't woken. But she stirred, whispering my name with the kind of tremor that told me she'd heard it too. We didn't move at first, just lay there, paralyzed, listening to the silence that followed. Seconds stretched into minutes. My skin prickled with the certainty that something was waiting for us to react. Finally, I slid out of bed, careful not to let the frame creak, and moved to the small table where my flashlight sat. I clicked it on. The beam cut through the window, slicing the darkness into pale stripes. Trees crowded the clearing, their trunks closer than I remembered, much closer. The light caught bark slick with dew, and in one terrible instant, I thought I saw impressions in the wood, indentations like palms pressed hard against the trunks. They vanished when I blinked, leaving only rough bark. Behind me, Elena whispered, "Don't." Her voice was sharp, warning, but I couldn't stop. I opened the RV's door and stepped out barefoot onto the damp ground. The air outside was too still, as if the forest had drawn in a breath and held it. My light swept the clearing, illuminating the ring of trees pressing in around us. Every trunk looked wrong, angled, leaning as though their weight shifted forward in the dark. I moved the beam back and forth, desperate to prove it was an illusion. That's when I heard it again. Knocks. Not on the RV this time, but deeper in the woods. 3 deliberate taps, far off, then answered by 3 more closer, as if the sound was moving toward me in measured steps. I spun the light, catching only emptiness between the trees. No animal made that rhythm. No person would bother with such precision. I backed toward the RV, my bare feet sinking into damp soil. Behind me, I heard Elena fumbling at the door, urging me back inside. My light fell on the ground near the closest tree, and my stomach turned cold. The prints were there again. Long indentations, deep as if whatever made them carried more weight than its thin shape suggested. I stumbled inside, slammed the door, and locked it. Elena grabbed my arm, demanding to know what I'd seen. I couldn't bring myself to describe it. How do you tell someone you found footprints that don't belong to any living thing? We stayed awake for hours, listening. The knocks faded, replaced by faint scraping, like branches dragged across bark. At some point, exhaustion forced us into shallow sleep, but even then I dreamed of trees bending, their branches clawing down toward the RV, tapping against the roof like fingers. Morning didn't bring relief. The clearing looked wrong in daylight. Smaller, tighter. The trees, which should have stood vertical, leaned subtly inward, their trunks angled just enough to suggest intent. Elena noticed it too. She didn't say it, but I saw the way her eyes flicked nervously from tree to tree as we packed. We moved quickly, tossing things into cupboards, ignoring the normal order we usually kept. When I went outside to disconnect the power hookup, I stopped cold. The prints were everywhere, not just around the RV now, but across the clearing, clustered near the fire pit, overlapping, circling. I crouched and touched one, feeling the depth again, as if the soil had been crushed by something impossibly dense. I yanked the cord free, shoved it into the compartment, and told Elena to start the engine. We didn't speak as we pulled out of the sight, gravel crunching under the tires. The trees seemed to watch us, leaning closer to the narrow road as if they didn't want to let us go. But leaving didn't help. As we drove, the forest pressed against both sides of the road, tighter and darker than it should have been. The GPS said we'd be back on the main highway in 20 minutes, but every bend looked the same: shadowed trees, road curling ahead, sky vanishing under canopy. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour, and still no sign of the exit. Elena gripped the wheel harder, her knuckles pale. She said the road felt longer, as if it kept folding in on itself. I wanted to reassure her, to say we'd just taken a wrong turn, but I knew the truth. The campground wasn't letting us leave. Then came the sound. At first it was faint, like rain tapping lightly on the roof, but the sky was clear. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and when I leaned toward the passenger side window, I realized it wasn't coming from above. It was coming from the trees lining the road. Each trunk we passed shuddered with knocks. 3 taps, perfectly spaced, like a signal passed from tree to tree. A rhythm chasing the RV as we drove faster, until it felt like the entire forest was knocking, answering itself in an endless relay. Elena pressed harder on the gas, the engine straining as the road narrowed. My chest tightened, breath shallow, convinced we were driving through a trap that had no end. And then, finally, light. The canopy broke apart, spilling daylight across the windshield. The highway appeared ahead, as sudden and shocking as if it had been conjured. Elena veered onto the asphalt, and only when the forest dropped away behind us did the knocking stop. We didn't speak for miles. The silence between us was heavier than any words could carry. My hands trembled against my knees, adrenaline refusing to let go. Elena's jaw was set, her eyes fixed ahead, as if afraid the forest might chase us onto the open road. Hours later, when we stopped at a gas station, the spell seemed to break. Cars pulled in and out, country music spilled from a speaker, and the ordinary world returned. But I couldn't shake what had happened. I couldn't shake the memory of those trees leaning closer, of prints pressed into soil where no living thing should have stood. That night, parked at a crowded RV park with lights and laughter around us, Elena finally spoke. She said she never wanted to go back to a place like that again. She said the forest felt alive in a way that wasn't natural. I agreed. But part of me, some stubborn, reckless part, wanted to understand. Because places like that don't happen by accident. They hold something old, something watching. And I knew, even as I promised Elena we'd stick to safer campgrounds, that I'd spend the rest of my life wondering. Back at the crowded RV park, I thought the world had steadied. Surrounded by families roasting marshmallows and kids riding bicycles in lazy circles, the strangeness of that forest felt far away. Yet even in the noise and light, I couldn't shake the impression that the trees there leaned a little too close together. I told myself it was paranoia, trauma replaying itself in any shape it could find. But that night, as Alina and I tried to sleep, I realized the forest wasn't done with us. The first sign was the smell. Damp earth, stronger than it should have been, as though the rain-soaked soil from Pennsylvania had followed us across state lines. It seeped into the RV's vents, earthy and metallic, filling my nostrils until I gagged. Elena rolled over, complaining that it stank like rotting wood. We searched, checked cupboards, even emptied the trash, but nothing explained it. We crawled back into bed. That's when I heard the knock. 3 sharp taps, not from the trees outside, but from inside the RV walls. My chest locked up. I glanced at Alina. Her eyes were open, wide, fixed on the thin paneling above her head. The sound came again, deliberate and slow. We didn't sleep. By dawn, the smell had faded, the knocking stopped. We convinced ourselves it was pipes, settling, maybe even mice. But deep down, we knew. The forest hadn't stayed behind, it had come with us. Over the next week, the signs multiplied. At a rest stop in Ohio, we left the RV for 10 minutes to grab food. When we returned, there was soil scattered across the floor as though something with mud-caked hands had pawed through our things. At night, we'd wake to find condensation on the inside of the windows, streaked downward like finger trails. Elena begged me not to talk about it, but her silence was filled with fear. The worst came in Indiana. We'd parked in a small campground near a lake, surrounded by willows and cottonwoods. Families dotted the shoreline, their laughter bright against the water. For a moment, I thought we'd found safety again, but as evening fell, the trees shifted. I swear they did. The willows nearest our site leaned farther than they should have, their long tendrils brushing the top of our awning like reaching hands. Elena sat inside with the blinds shut, refusing to look out. I sat at the picnic table, pretending to read, but my eyes never left the tree line. And then across the lake, I saw movement. Not the jerky sprint of a deer, not the hunched silhouette of a person. It was taller, thinner, its shape distorted as though the trees themselves had stretched into a figure and broken free. It stood still, just beyond the reflection of the water, watching. I shut the book, went inside, and locked every door. I didn't tell Elena what I'd seen. She was already unraveling, whispering that the trees outside bent closer each night. I couldn't add to her terror, but in my chest the truth was undeniable. Whatever had marked us back in Pennsylvania had followed. And it was patient. It didn't want us gone. It wanted us worn down. That night, the knocking was louder. Walls, roof, floor, like 1,000 branches rapping in unison. Elena covered her ears, crying, begging for it to stop. I shouted into the darkness, demanded to know what it wanted, but the knocks only grew faster, overlapping, until the RV seemed to vibrate with their rhythm. And then, just as suddenly as it began, silence. We sat in that silence for hours, too afraid to sleep. My mind kept circling the same thought. The knocks weren't random. They were communication. A signal. But to what? To whom? By morning, the willows around our site leaned visibly toward us. Their trunks had curved overnight, unnatural arcs bending as if the entire grove strained closer. I took Elena's hand, told her we had to leave immediately, and for once, she didn't argue. As we drove away, I looked in the side mirror. The willows stood straight again, perfectly vertical, as though nothing had happened. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like mockery. Days blurred together after that. We drove long hours, sleeping in truck stops instead of campgrounds. Elena barely spoke. She kept her eyes on the road or shut tight against the window, refusing to look at the trees we passed. I tried to be strong, to anchor us, but even I began to see them differently. Every stretch of forest leaned, subtly angled toward us. Pines bowed at the edge of highways. Cottonwoods tilted near rest areas. Even single oaks in farmers' fields seemed to crane their branches in our direction. It was everywhere. The final breaking point came in Illinois. We stopped at a small family-owned RV park, thinking the open prairie might give us some peace. The land stretched wide and flat, cornfields rolling out in every direction, few trees in sight, just a handful scattered near the horizon. I thought maybe finally we'd outrun it. But that night, under a flat, starless sky, I woke to a sound so familiar it made my stomach drop. Knocks. 3 taps, impossibly loud, against the side of the RV. Not from trees. They were too far away. Not from people. The park was nearly empty. I opened the blinds. My heart nearly stopped. A tree stood just outside the window. It hadn't been there when we parked. It was tall, pale-barked, and its trunk bent at an angle so severe it seemed on the verge of snapping. Its crown of branches scraped across the roof as though it had leaned itself forward just to reach us. I stumbled back, choking on breath, waking Elena. She saw it too, and the sound she made, a sharp, raw sob, still echoes in my ears. We didn't pack. We didn't plan. We just started the engine and drove into the night, leaving everything behind on the picnic table. Chairs, dishes, even the lantern still burning. The road stretched endless in the dark, but we didn't stop. We couldn't, not until dawn painted the horizon, and even then I knew stopping was only buying us time. because no matter where we went, the trees would lean closer, and they would keep leaning. We drove for 12 hours straight, fueled by fear more than gasoline. Elena barely spoke, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if looking back would invite the forest closer. I tried to convince myself that the tree outside our window in Illinois had been some kind of mistake, a misremembered landmark, exhaustion twisting reality. But deep down, I knew better. That night, we found ourselves in Missouri, parked in a crowded truck stop off the interstate. Diesel engines roared around us, floodlights bathed the lot in harsh yellow, and the concrete stretched wide and bare of anything living. For the first time in days, I felt relief. No trees here, just machines and asphalt. Elena collapsed into sleep, but I couldn't. I sat upright in the passenger seat, staring through the windshield, waiting for something to prove me wrong. Hours passed. The sky lightened toward dawn. And then, there it was, a sound so faint I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. 3 knocks. Not against the RV, not from the lot, but carried on the air itself. Soft, distant, a rhythm I could never mistake. My throat tightened. I looked around wildly, but there was nothing, just the endless lot, rows of trucks, concrete stretching like a desert. Still, the sound came again, this time closer. 3 taps, like fingers drumming a desk. I shook Elena awake. She blinked at me, dazed, and I whispered, "It's here." Her face drained of color. She didn't ask what I meant. She already knew. That day, we kept driving west, as though distance alone could protect us, through plains, over rivers, into the mountains. But the truth pressed down heavier with every mile. It wasn't about where we were. The trees didn't need roots in the ground to follow us. They had already marked us, already tied something invisible around our lives. By the time we reached Colorado, the mountains themselves seemed to lean. Aspen groves lined the roadsides, their white trunks bending inward in eerie unison. At night, the knocking never stopped. Sometimes faint, sometimes deafening, sometimes from walls that should have been impossible to reach. Elena covered her ears, tears streaming silently, and I sat rigid in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel even when the RV wasn't moving, as though holding on could anchor us. And then came the night we almost didn't make it. We'd stopped at a small pull-off on a mountain road, too exhausted to keep driving. The sky above was littered with stars, a breathtaking reminder of how small we were. For a few minutes, I let myself believe we were safe, until I saw the shadows. At first, I thought it was the firelight from another camper down the road, flickering through the trees. But the shadows moved wrong. Long, stretched, bending across the ground in ways that didn't match the branches above. They slid toward us, slow and deliberate, dark shapes stretching farther than they should. Elena grabbed my arm. "Do you see it?" I nodded, unable to speak. The shadows pooled at the edge of the clearing, and then the trees themselves began to lean, not subtly this time. Their trunks groaned, wood straining as if bending under immense weight. They tilted toward us, closer, branches reaching, scraping across the RV's roof. The knocking began, loud, furious, rattling every panel of the RV. 3 taps over and over, overlapping until the rhythm became chaos. The whole vehicle shook. Elena screamed, clutching my hand. I shouted into the night, demanding to know what it wanted, but the forest answered only with more knocks, more leaning, more crushing weight. The RV tilted. I swear it did. Tires sinking into soil, frame groaning under pressure as if invisible hands were trying to fold it inward. I started the engine. Gravel sprayed as I slammed into drive, barreling down the mountain road. Branches whipped against the windows, shadows chasing us, the knocking fading only when the forest thinned and the lights of a distant town came into view. When we finally stopped, miles away in a gas station parking lot, Elena collapsed against the dashboard, sobbing. I held her, whispering we were safe, though every word felt like a lie, because I knew the truth now. It wasn't just the campground in Pennsylvania. It wasn't even the trees themselves. It was something older, something that used the trees as its mouth, its arms, its way of reaching into our world. And we had been chosen, or cursed, or claimed. Elena begged me to turn back east, to go home, to leave the RV behind and return to normal life. But how could we? Normal was gone. Wherever we went, the trees leaned closer. We pressed on westward anyway, chasing some impossible hope that distance could free us. But hope was all we had left. In Utah, desert stretched wide and treeless, but the fear never left. We parked among red stone and dry scrub, and still at night, I heard it. The knocks. Not from trees this time, there were none, but from the very walls of the RV, as though the rhythm had sunk into the bones of our home. Elena whispered, voice cracked and hollow, "It's inside now." I didn't argue, because she was right. The trees had leaned closer each night until there was no distance left at all. Utah's red desert should have given me comfort. No forests, no canopies, no trunks bending silently through the night. But as we sat in that barren land, the emptiness felt wrong. The rocks seemed to loom the way trees once had, casting shadows that leaned toward us as the sun fell. It wasn't the trees anymore. It was everything. The earth itself had learned to follow. The knocks didn't stop. That night, as the stars ignited across the sky, the tapping came from inside the cupboards, from the floor beneath our bed, from the thin walls of the bathroom door. Always three, always patient. The rhythm of something waiting us out. Elena pressed her hands against her ears, whispering over and over, "Make it stop. Please just make it stop." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But how do you stop something that moves with you? That wears the world like a mask? By morning, I was unraveling. My reflection in the bathroom mirror startled me, eyes bloodshot, cheeks hollow, a man hollowed out by fear. Elena looked worse. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. Her lips were cracked, her skin pale, and her eyes darted toward every sound as though expecting branches to crash through the walls. That was the morning I knew we couldn't keep running. Running was exactly what it wanted. I didn't say it aloud. Not yet. Instead, I told Elena we'd keep going west, all the way to the Pacific. Salt water, endless waves. Maybe there at the edge of the continent it would stop. She nodded, clinging to the idea like a child clutching a blanket. But in my chest, I knew the ocean wouldn't matter, because it wasn't chasing us, it was carrying us. The days blurred together. Nevada's dry emptiness, California's long stretches of farmland. Every night, no matter how treeless the land, the knocks followed, sometimes faint like whispers under the floorboards, sometimes loud enough to rattle dishes from the cupboards, and the leaning. Even in places where trees were sparse, they found us. An orchard with twisted branches bowing toward the RV, palms in a rest area bending unnaturally, as though straining against their roots just to be nearer. I'd look away, swear to myself it was imagination, then look back to find them leaning farther still. Elena started drawing the blinds during the day, refusing to look outside. She said the world itself tilted toward us now, and I couldn't argue. By the time we reached the coast, she was a shadow of herself. We parked at a cliffside campground overlooking the Pacific, waves breaking against rocks far below. The salty air carried promise, but also a strange sweetness, like sap dripping through salt. That night I thought maybe, just maybe, it would end. But the knocks came anyway. Not against the RV this time, against the ground beneath us. Deep, resonant thuds rising through the earth itself, shaking the frame of the RV as though roots pressed upward through the soil. The sound was slower than before, not 3 taps but 1, drawn-out strike at a time, like a heartbeat echoing underground. Elena broke then. She clutched my shirt, her body shaking, tears streaming unchecked. "We can't run anymore," she whispered. "It won't let us. It's not following, it's already inside." And I knew she was right. So I made a decision, one I never told her until it was too late. The next morning, I drove us inland again, back toward the forests, not to escape, but to confront. I told Elena we were heading to a safer place, but in truth, I aimed for the densest woods I could find. If the trees wanted us, then we'd meet them head on. We arrived at a remote campground in Northern California, shrouded by towering redwoods. The air was cool, damp, filled with the ancient hush of living things that had stood longer than civilizations. Elena refused to get out of the RV. She sat curled on the couch, eyes hollow, lips moving in silent prayers. I stepped outside alone. The trees loomed hundreds of feet above me, their trunks impossibly wide, their crowns lost in shadow, and they leaned. Not much, not enough to be noticed by anyone else, but enough for me to feel it, like giants bowing in slow motion. I stood in the center of them, my heart pounding, and I spoke aloud. I know you're here. I know you've been with us since Pennsylvania. What do you want? The forest answered with silence. Then, knocks. 3 sharp taps from one trunk, 3 from another, 3 behind me until the rhythm circled me in a pattern that made my head spin. The ground vibrated, faint at first, then stronger until I felt it in my teeth. I dropped to my knees. For a moment, I thought I saw it, shapes within the bark itself. Hands pressed outward, faces straining against the wood like trapped souls desperate to be seen. Their mouths opened, but no sound came, only the hollow knocking that filled every inch of the clearing. And then I understood. It wasn't chasing us, it wasn't torment for its own sake. It wanted us to stay, to sink roots of our own, to become part of whatever had lived in those woods long before we came. I staggered back to the RV, trembling, and found Elena still curled in the dark. I told her what I'd seen. She stared at me for a long time, then whispered, "It doesn't matter if we run. It doesn't matter if we fight. We're already theirs." That night, neither of us slept. The knocks didn't come from outside anymore. They came from within the walls, the floor, the air itself. And with every strike, I felt it, something inside me shifting, bending, leaning, like a tree learning which way to fall. The walls of the RV felt thinner with each passing hour. Every knock reverberated inside my bones, a rhythm I could no longer separate from my own heartbeat. Elena barely moved anymore. She sat by the window with the blinds drawn, rocking faintly, lips whispering words I couldn't catch. I wanted to comfort her, to hold her, but I was afraid if I touched her, I'd feel roots beneath her skin. By the 3rd day in the redwoods, I couldn't deny it. We weren't just being haunted. We were being claimed. The trees leaned closer each night, their massive trunks angled toward our clearing like cathedral walls bowing inward. Even in daylight, their shadows swallowed us. The air grew thicker, heavier, as though every breath carried spores that changed us from the inside. My thoughts tangled like roots underground. Memories felt distorted, some sharp, others smothered, until I wasn't sure if I was remembering my life or someone else's. That evening, I made a decision. One final act, one last desperate attempt to break free before we lost ourselves completely. I told Elena we were leaving. Not just driving away, we were abandoning the RV, hiking out on foot. She shook her head violently, clutching her knees to her chest. "We can't leave it," she whispered. "It's part of us now. If we go, it will follow." Her words chilled me, but I refused to accept them. I stuffed a backpack with food, water, a flashlight, and whatever courage I could scrape together. I begged her to come with me. She only stared at me with wide, glassy eyes and said, "You'll come back. They all come back." I didn't ask who they were. I didn't want to know. I left her in the RV and stepped into the forest. The redwoods towered above one like ancient pillars blotting out the sky. The air smelled of moss, wet bark, and something sweeter like sap or blood. Every step I took echoed unnaturally, as though the ground itself amplified my movements. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no rustle of animals. Only the faint creak of trunks shifting, leaning, groaning closer with every breath I took. I walked for hours, though it felt like minutes. No matter which direction I turned, the trees pressed tighter. The path twisted back on itself, roots rising like barriers, branches lowering to brush against my shoulders. I felt watched, measured, and every time I looked over my shoulder, the forest looked different, as if rearranged the moment I turned away. Finally, I broke into a clearing. At its center stood a single tree, wider than the RV, its bark dark and wet as though it bled sap. Its trunk leaned impossibly forward, bowing toward me. The ground around it was littered with impressions, those same long, finger-like prints pressed deep into the soil, hundreds of them circling the tree like worshippers. I fell to my knees. My flashlight flickered, then died, though I hadn't touched the switch. The air grew colder, pressing against my lungs until each breath burned. And then the knocking began. Not from around me, from within the massive tree. 3 slow, deliberate knocks that shook the earth. The sound carried through the roots, into my bones, vibrating until my teeth ached. I clutched my ears, but it didn't matter. The noise came from inside me now, a rhythm sinking deeper and deeper, replacing my own pulse. And then I saw them. Faces, dozens of them, pressed into the bark. Mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with eternal dread. Some looked fresh, features distinct and human. Others had worn smooth with time, blurred into the texture of wood. Their bodies weren't there, but I knew. They were inside, absorbed, claimed. My stomach lurched. I stumbled backward, shaking my head. No, you can't have me. The tree groaned, leaning closer, its bark splitting with the sound of cracking bones. From its base, roots slithered outward, thick as arms, dragging through the soil toward me. I ran. Branches lashed at my face, roots caught at my ankles, but somehow I tore free. The forest bent around me, paths twisting, trees closing in, but adrenaline carried me forward. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs buckled, until I saw the dim outline of the RV's lights through the trunks. I burst inside, slamming the door, gasping for air. Elena was gone. I searched every corner, every cupboard, even beneath the bed. Nothing. The only sign she'd ever been there was her journal on the counter, open to a blank page. Except it wasn't blank. Scratched into the paper, pressed so hard the pen tore through, were 3 words. The trees choose. My hands shook as I dropped it. Outside, the knocking began again, louder, closer, surrounding the RV from every direction until it felt like the forest itself was pressing against the walls. I collapsed into the driver's seat, fumbling the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life, but even over the sound, I heard it, the steady, relentless rhythm of the knocks. I floored the gas, gravel spraying, headlights cutting through the dense trunks. The trees leaned across the road, closing gaps, but somehow I forced the RV through. Branches scraped like claws, trunks bent until I swore they'd snap, but the road held. And then, suddenly, darkness broke. I was back on the highway. The forest fell away in the mirrors, retreating into shadow. The knocking stopped. Silence returned, broken only by the hum of the engine. For the first time in weeks, I was alone, truly alone. I wanted to believe I'd escaped, that Elena had been wrong. But as I drove mile after mile, I began to notice the trees along the highway. Oaks, maples, pines. They all leaned ever so slightly toward the road, toward me, watching, waiting. And in the rhythm of my tires against the asphalt, I swear I heard it. 3 knocks. I drove through the night with no destination. The road stretched ahead in a blur of headlights and cracked asphalt, but I wasn't really watching it. My eyes kept darting to the trees that lined the shoulders of the highway, tilting in, bending ever so slightly toward me. It was subtle, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. They weren't redwoods anymore, but the posture was the same. Curious. Patient. I stopped for gas around 3 in the morning. The clerk barely looked up as I walked inside, my hands trembling, my clothes streaked with dirt and sap. I wanted to ask him if he noticed the trees, if he could hear the knocking. But I didn't. People don't survive in this world by voicing the things that stalk the edges of reason. They survive by pretending not to see. On the drive out of the station, I thought of Elena. Her last words replayed in my mind. You'll come back. They all come back. It didn't feel like a warning anymore. It felt like a prophecy. I tried calling her name as I drove, as if she might be hiding somewhere in the back of the RV, but only silence answered. Silence, and that faint, phantom rhythm. 3 knocks. Always 3. It didn't matter if the radio was blasting or if the road was empty. It was there, under everything. The days blurred after that. I didn't return to the campgrounds, but the forest didn't need me to. It followed. In every town I passed, the trees along the streets seemed to bow toward me. In every rest stop, I'd hear faint tapping against the RV walls, though no one was outside. I thought about checking into a hotel, but the idea of leaving the RV behind felt impossible. Not because I loved it, but because I was convinced if I stepped away, I'd find it parked outside again by morning, waiting. And then there were the faces. At first, I only saw them in dreams, Elena's eyes wide with fear, her features stretching into bark, her mouth sealed by roots. But then, waking, I started catching glimpses of her reflection in windows in the rearview mirror. Not as she was, but as part of something vast and wooden, her skin cracked, her hair tangled with vines. I stopped sleeping. The body can only hold out for so long. One night, somewhere on an empty stretch of desert road, I dozed off at the wheel. The RV drifted, tires grinding on gravel, and the sudden jolt snapped me awake. For a moment, I thought I'd crashed. But no, when I looked out the windshield, the highway was gone. The redwoods surrounded me again. I slammed the brakes, my chest heaving, but the RV sat calmly in a forest clearing, dew shimmering on the windshield. I stumbled outside, certain it was another dream. The air was damp, the smell of earth rich and sweet. And there, just a few feet away, stood a tree leaning forward, bark scarred with the outlines of faces. One of them was Elena's. Her eyes found mine, though they didn't blink. Her lips parted, and I swear I heard her voice, not with my ears, but inside my head. "It's not the trees, Daniel. It's us. We belong to them." I fell backward, scrambling into the RV, and slammed the door. I don't remember how I got back to the highway. When I came to, the forest was gone again, replaced by open road. But something had changed. I realized then that escape was never the point. You don't outrun roots. They're patient. They spread quietly and visibly until one day they're already beneath you, already inside you. Now, months later, I sit at campgrounds with other travelers trying to look normal. They share stories about breakdowns, storms, and noisy neighbors. I laugh at the right moments, but every time someone talks about waking in the night to strange sounds outside their RV or about shadows moving just beyond the firelight, I feel the blood drain from my face. Because I know what's waiting for them. I can't warn them. Even if I tried, they'd just smile politely and move on, assuming I'd spent too many nights alone in the woods. And maybe that's true. Maybe this is all in my head, but then the knocking comes again. Always 3 times, always just before dawn. I've started to think about what Elena said, that the RV wasn't just a vehicle, it was part of the claim, a vessel. Maybe when you stay in a place long enough, the ground beneath you decides you're not a guest anymore. You're part of the soil, the cycle, the growth. You don't live in the forest. The forest lives in you. Sometimes I drive past stretches of farmland where there aren't any trees at all, flat, open spaces where the horizon goes on forever. For a little while, I almost feel free. But then I'll see a lone oak by the roadside leaning toward me as if it knows exactly who I am. And I realize there's nowhere to run. You can cut trees down, you can burn them, but roots remain. Roots wait. The hardest part is knowing Elena is gone, but not gone. She's in there somewhere, held in rings of wood that will outlast centuries. I tell myself she isn't suffering, that she's simply become something eternal. But then I hear her voice in the knock, in the whisper of leaves against glass, and I know she's still calling out, still trapped. And sometimes, late at night, when the forest presses close and the shadows deepen, I wonder if she's calling for me. Not to save her, but to join her. The trees lean closer each night. And one day soon, I think I'll stop resisting, because maybe belonging, no matter how terrifying, is better than being alone. I'll never forget the first night I parked my RV in the Appalachian Mountains. The trees seemed taller than any I'd seen before, stretching skyward in a way that made me feel small, diminished, like I'd driven into the shadow of something ancient and watchful. The Appalachians aren't just mountains. They're a maze of ridges and hollows where the mist rises at dusk like something alive. Locals call them old hills, older than bones, older than memory. And when you step into their valleys alone, you feel that weight settle on your chest, as if the land itself has been holding secrets longer than you've been alive. I had told myself it would be a trip about freedom, a test of resilience, a solo retreat where I could disconnect, clear my head, and prove I could handle the silence. I'd been carrying a lot of baggage, personal mistakes, restless nights, the urge to just disappear for a while. And maybe that's what made me blind to the warnings. The way the gas station clerk in a dusty little West Virginia town paused when I said I'd be camping alone, the way his eyes dropped to the counter and his voice lowered, "Not wise out there by yourself." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. I thought it was just the kind of folksy caution you hear anywhere rural. By the time I wound my way into the mountains, it was near sundown. The forest pressed close on either side of the gravel road, its shadows pulling long and cold. I found a clearing just off an old logging trail, flat enough to park, shielded by hemlock and oak. No cell service, no lights on the horizon, just my Volkswagen camper van tucked into the silence. I killed the engine and listened as the world exhaled around me. Cicadas buzzing, a whippoorwill calling, the faint trickle of water somewhere deeper in the hollow. But as I sat there staring through the windshield, I realized something was missing. A forest that thick should have been alive with rustling, with small things moving, squirrels, rabbits, foxes. Instead, it felt staged, like I'd stepped into a set built to look like wilderness, but all the living pieces had been removed. That kind of quiet doesn't comfort you. It makes your skin crawl. I busied myself with camp chores, unfolding my camp chair, lighting a small fire, heating up a simple dinner. The motions helped. They gave me a rhythm, something familiar. The fire cracked, and I tried to convince myself that the quiet was a gift. That solitude was what I'd come here for. But my ears kept straining at the edges of the night. I thought I heard footsteps once, light, deliberate crunches of leaves just beyond the tree line. I stood up fast, flashlight in hand, sweeping the beam across the undergrowth. Nothing. Just branches swaying, mist gathering low to the ground. I laughed it off, told myself I was jumpy, wound too tight from the drive. But when I sat back down, the silence swallowed my fire's crackle, and I swear I felt eyes on me. Not the way you feel when someone glances your direction. The way you feel when someone waits. Sleep didn't come easy. Inside the van, the air was stuffy, and every creak outside felt amplified, pressing through the thin metal walls. Around midnight, I heard it. 3 knocks. Slow, hollow, like knuckles against wood. Not on the van itself. Off to the side, maybe against a tree. My heart stuttered. I lay frozen, every nerve screaming. The rational part of me scrambled for explanations. A branch falling, an animal brushing past, but deep down I knew the rhythm was too precise. I forced myself to peek through the curtain. The fire had burned down to coals, casting a faint orange glow. The trees stood still, a wall of black against black. Nothing moved. I told myself to breathe, to wait it out, that fear can invent patterns out of shadows. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. Morning brought light but not relief. I stepped out into damp grass, the fire pit cold, and that's when I saw it. Just beyond the circle of my camp, pressed into the soft soil, were footprints. Human. Bare. The size of my own. They circled the van once, stopped at the back door, then trailed off into the woods. I froze there, staring down at those prints, my breath fogging in the cool air. I hadn't heard anyone approach the van. Not really. Just the knocks. But the evidence was there. Someone, or something, had been close enough to touch the door while I slept. Alone, miles into the mountains, no other campsites around. I thought about leaving right then, packing up, turning the van back down the gravel road. But pride is a stubborn thing, and so is denial. I told myself it could have been hikers passing through, someone curious but not dangerous. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was the exact test I'd come here for, to face fear and keep steady. So I stayed. I boiled water, made coffee, tried to shake the chill. The forest seemed more alive in the morning, birds calling, squirrels chattering, almost as if whatever had pressed close in the night retreated with the dawn. By afternoon, I convinced myself it was nothing, that I could handle one more night. But the mountains don't forgive arrogance. They feed on it. That evening, as dusk poured like ink into the hollows, the forest went silent again. The exact same silence as before, like someone had thrown a switch and cut all sound. I sat by the fire, clutching my mug, watching shadows stretch long between the trees. And then I heard it again. Knocks. 3. Steady. Deliberate. This time closer. I called out, voice shaking, "Hello?" No answer. Just mist creeping thicker, curling low across the clearing. I grabbed my flashlight, swept it across the tree line. Nothing. But when I turned back, the knocks came again behind me. I spun, beam cutting through smoke and fog, and my stomach dropped. There, just at the edge of the clearing, stood a shape. Tall, still, too still. I blinked, and it was gone, swallowed by the mist. Panic surged. Every instinct screamed at me to get in the van, lock the doors, and drive. But some part of me froze, nailed to the chair by something deeper than fear. The realization that whatever it was hadn't stumbled upon me. It had waited for me. That I wasn't the one observing the forest. The forest was observing me. I don't remember deciding to move. My legs carried me back into the van, my hands fumbling with the lock. I sat there in the dark, engine off, heart hammering. The mist pressed against the windows, thick and damp, and I swore I saw movement within it, shapes sliding past, never fully forming. Sleep never came that night. Only the steady pulse of fear, the faint echo of knocks, and the memory of those footprints circling my van like a warning. By morning, I was a shell of myself, eyes bloodshot, nerves frayed, hands trembling as I lit the stove for coffee. The woods looked deceptively calm. Sunlight broke through the canopy in golden shafts, birds called again, and for a moment I wondered if I'd conjured it all out of exhaustion and paranoia. But when I walked to the tree line, scanning the soil for more prints, I found something worse. Not human tracks this time, not even animal in a way I recognized. In the mud, pressed deep like the earth itself recoiled, were impressions that looked like hands. Not feet, not paws. Hands. Elongated, with fingers that trailed too long, too thin, dragging lines into the soil. They led away from the camp into the hollow, as if whatever had stood outside my van during the night had dropped to all fours and crawled away. I stood there in the crisp morning air, the world around me buzzing with insects, and felt my chest tighten. Rational thought tried to wedge itself in. Maybe an animal with an odd gait, maybe erosion patterns, but my gut knew better. The Appalachian Mountains aren't just old. They carry things older than story, older than the people who first walked their ridges. I'd heard tales, growing up, about things that lived in caves, creatures you weren't supposed to name out loud. I'd never believed them. But belief wasn't the point. Presence was, and presence lingered here. I packed slowly, hands shaking, trying to act as if routine could anchor me. Coffee, breakfast, fold the chair, douse the fire. Every snap of a twig made my skin prickle. I was set on leaving. That was the plan. Head back down the gravel road, find civilization, push the memory into a box I'd never open again. But as I fired up the van and turned toward the trail, I realized something chilling. The road looked different. I'd driven in on a simple gravel path, a single-lane track carved through the woods, barely maintained. But now, staring through the windshield, I saw two diverging paths. One that looked like the road I came in on, another cutting off at an angle, lined with ruts and half hidden by overgrowth. I shut off the engine and stepped outside, walking a few yards to check. Both roads disappeared into the same heavy canopy. Neither bore clear signs of recent traffic. I circled back, palms sweating. I knew which way I'd come in. But standing there, something in me faltered. The road I thought was mine looked altered, narrower, the ground softer, almost like it had been laid fresh during the night. The other road seemed unnatural too, as if waiting, baiting. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint at first, then stronger. A damp, metallic tang like rust mixed with wet moss. It clung to the air, rising heavier as I stood between the forks. My stomach turned, and I knew the mountains were toying with me. Choice was an illusion here. I did what I thought was logical. I picked the road I knew I had taken, gunned the engine, and pushed the van forward. The forest swallowed me quick, the canopy knitting tighter, the gravel spitting beneath my tires. My knuckles whitened on the wheel as I tried to ignore how wrong it felt, how the light dimmed faster than it should have. 10 minutes in, I glanced at the clock, then 20, then 30. Still the same road, the same thick forest pressing in, no sign of the descent back toward town. And then my stomach dropped. I rounded a bend, and there it was, my campsite. The fire pit cold, my footprints circling the van, the trees pressing close. I slammed the brakes, heart lurching, staring out the windshield at the place I had just left. I hadn't turned around. I hadn't taken a wrong fork. The road had brought me back. I stumbled out, chest tight, air thin, trying to comprehend the impossible. The woods were silent again, that oppressive hush pressing on my eardrums like water. I shouted, voice cracking, "Hello? Is anyone out here?" The words echoed, rolled back hollow and thin, and then came the knock. This time, not 3, not slow, a frantic, rapid pounding from deep in the trees like dozens of fists slamming in rhythm. My skin crawled as the sound shifted from one side of the clearing to the other, as if circling me, moving too fast for any human. My breath came shallow, my chest hitching as I backed toward the van. The pounding stopped all at once. Dead silence, and then I heard my name. Clear. Low. Drawn out like a whisper stretched into a groan. Ili! The sound slithered from the hollow, carrying through the mist. My heart seized. No one knew my name here. No one. I bolted back into the van, slammed the lock, gripped the wheel so tight my hands ached. The forest outside pressed closer, the mist curling higher against the windows. My reflection in the glass looked pale, wide-eyed, more corpse than man. And beneath that reflection, faint but visible, I swore I saw another face. Not behind me. Inside the reflection itself, watching. I started the engine, but the road ahead blurred in the fog. The headlights carved out only a few feet of clarity before drowning in white. I drove anyway, every muscle tight, praying the wheels would find traction, that the road would let me go. But the knocks returned, this time from underneath. A hollow thud against the undercarriage, like something crawling beneath the van as I drove. I swerved, panic clawing at my throat. My mind screamed, "Don't stop! Don't stop!" But the sound grew louder, faster, keeping pace no matter how hard I pressed the gas. And then just as suddenly, silence. I pulled over, chest heaving, sweat soaking my shirt. I sat there in the humming dark, headlights cutting a weak tunnel through the fog, waiting for something to lunge from the tree line. But nothing came. The road stretched endless, the forest whispering at its edges. I knew then I was trapped. The Appalachians weren't just holding me, they were testing me. Seeing how far I'd been before I broke, and I was already breaking. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every shadow through the window pulsed with threat. Every creak of the van's frame felt like fingers dragging along the metal. I sat with a knife in my lap, blade trembling in my grip, telling myself over and over that dawn would come, that daylight meant escape. But the mountains don't care about dawn. They make their own rules. And as the hours stretched thin, I realized with a shuddering certainty that I might never see the outside world again. When light finally seeped through the curtains, it wasn't the kind of sunrise I expected. It was pale, weak, like the forest itself had wrung the color out of the sky. I stepped outside, eyes raw from sleeplessness, every part of me aching. The van stood in the same clearing. The fire pit still sat cold, but the air felt thicker, like breathing through wet cloth. I walked to the edge of the trees, scanning for footprints, for those impossible handprints, for any sign I hadn't lost my mind. And I found something worse. A mark carved deep into the bark of a hemlock. Not initials, not a hunter's blaze. A circle split down the middle with a vertical line and 3 small slashes etched along the base. Fresh, sap bleeding. I don't know why it froze me so badly, maybe because it wasn't random. It was deliberate. A symbol left with intent facing directly toward my van. Whoever or whatever made it had wanted me to see. I backed away, the weight of those woods pressing heavier with each step. I told myself I had to leave, no matter what road twisted, no matter what loop brought me back. Staying meant waiting for the next sign, the next knock, the next whisper, and I wasn't sure I'd survive another night. So I drove. The road stretched endless again, the canopy swallowing the sky. I kept the wheel straight, eyes locked ahead, refusing to glance at the rearview mirror, where reflections twisted too easily. Minutes bled into hours, though the odometer barely ticked forward. And then, without warning, the trees broke. I slammed the brakes, breath catching in my throat. Before me stretched a wide valley, ridges rolling in layers like waves of green. Mist clung low, silver in the muted light. And there, at the center of the hollow, lay a cabin. Weathered, half collapsed, its roof sagging under years of rain and rot. Smoke rose faint from a crooked chimney, curling into the sky like a signal. My stomach nodded. Every instinct told me to keep driving. But another pull, subtle and insidious, urged me down the slope. Curiosity, or maybe something darker, whispering that answers waited inside those leaning walls. I don't remember choosing. One moment I was staring, the next I was bumping down a narrow track that cut into the valley, tires crunching damp gravel. The cabin loomed closer with each turn, its windows dark, door hanging loose on rusted hinges. I killed the engine and sat frozen, hands welded to the wheel. The forest behind me stood like a wall, silent, impenetrable. The cabin before me breathed smoke into the sky, though no figure moved inside. I forced myself out. Each step toward that porch felt like walking into a dare I hadn't agreed to. The boards groaned under my weight. The smell of damp wood and cold ash thickened my nose. I pushed the door, and it swung inward with a sigh. Inside, the light was dim, filtered through grime-streaked windows. Dust swirled in lazy spirals, disturbed by my presence. And on the table in the center of the room sat a lantern. Lit, its flame small but steady, casting long, twitching shadows along the walls. I should have run. I should have bolted back to the van, peeled out of that valley, never looked back. But I stepped inside, drawn, caught in the gravity of something older than decision. The room held only fragments of life, a broken chair, a kettle rusted through, a bed frame leaning crooked. But on the far wall, etched deep into the wood, I saw the same symbol as the tree. A circle, split, slashed 3 times. Bigger now, gouged so violently that splinters jutted like teeth. My breath hitched, and then I heard it. Knocking, not from outside, from beneath the floor. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the hollow boards under my boots. I staggered back, heart hammering, eyes wide on the floorboards as the sound traveled knock, 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 circling under me faster, louder, until it stopped directly beneath where I stood. And then a voice. Not whispered this time, not stretched. Clear, close, rising through the cracks between the boards. You shouldn't have come here alone. I stumbled backward, shoulders slamming the door frame, eyes darting for any sign of movement. A lantern flickered. The shadows along the walls seemed to bend, pulling toward me, like the room itself leaned in to listen. I bolted. Back through the doorway, down the porch steps, across the grass. My lungs burned, my legs shook, but I didn't stop until I was inside the van, engine roaring, tires spitting gravel as I tore back up the track. My eyes blurred with tears, hands shaking the wheel, but I didn't care. I had to get away from that valley, that cabin, that voice. The road coiled back into the forest, twisting sharp, each turn like a blade. I drove blind, panic chewing through thought, until at last I hit a straight stretch and slammed the brakes, chest heaving. Silence. The woods pressed in, mist curled low, and as I sat there trying to breathe, I realized something that shattered me. In the rearview mirror, faint but clear, the lantern still burned. Not in the cabin, not in the valley, in the back of my van. The glass flickered with orange light, shadows twitching across the cramped interior. I didn't turn. Couldn't. My body locked, hands welded to the wheel, throat closing. I sat there in the breathless dark, the flames glow licking at the corners of my vision. And then came the knock. Not from outside, not from beneath, from inside the van itself, just inches behind me. I didn't think I couldn't. Instinct took over. My foot slammed the gas, the van lurched forward, and I drove blind into the trees, headlights cutting shaky tunnels through mist and bark. The knocks behind me grew frantic, pounding on the walls, on the metal, on the glass, until it felt like the whole van was alive, fists slamming from the inside out. "Stop it," I screamed. voice raw as if shouting could make it hear me. The pounding ceased, just like that. The silence that followed was worse, heavy, suffocating, pressing against my ears until my skull ached. I risked a glance at the rearview mirror. No lantern, no flame, only darkness swallowing the van's interior. I wanted to believe it was over, that my mind had snapped from lack of sleep and fear, that I'd hallucinated it all. But then I saw the glass. My rear window was smeared with something, oily, wet, streaking downward as if fingertips had dragged across it from the inside. And in the middle of that smear, words scratched into the fog of condensation. Stay. My chest caved in. I nearly lost control of the wheel, swerving before jerking it straight again. The forest swallowed me deeper, the road stretching longer, endless. I drove until the fuel gauge dipped near empty. Panic gave way to despair. What if there was no way out? What if the Appalachians had swallowed me whole, like looping me inside their ribs like a ghost in a cage? Finally, headlights caught something ahead, an opening in the trees, wide enough to suggest a clearing. Relief surged, though brittle, fragile. I pulled in, heart hammering, and killed the engine. The space was barren, ringed by trees, soil damp and uneven. No structures, no cabins, just a clearing big enough to breathe. I sat there, hands trembling on the wheel, whispering to myself like a prayer, just wait it out. Dawn will come again, you'll find the road, you'll get out. But the woods don't let you bargain. The mist gathered fast, spilling into the clearing like water from a broken dam. I locked the doors, crawled into the back, and curled on the floor, knife in hand, trying to make myself smaller. The air grew damp, heavy with that metallic tang, and then the sound returned. Not knocking this time. Breathing. Slow, wet, rattling breaths, rising and falling as if lungs pressed against the thin skin of the van. I squeezed my eyes shut, every muscle rigid, listening as it circled, dragging its inhale, dragging its exhale, pausing at the windows at the door. And then, from just beyond the glass, a voice I knew. Eli, open up. My heart froze. It was my brother's voice. Matthew, but Matthew estates away. Safe. Alive. Not here. I shook my head, whispering, no, no, no. The voice came again, firmer. It's me. Let me in. I clutched the knife, knuckles white, tears burning my eyes. It wasn't him. It couldn't be. The Appalachians were playing with me now, pulling strings tied to memory, to love, to guilt. And then I made the mistake of looking. Through the condensation-fogged window, a shape stood. Broad shoulders, familiar outline. My brother's face, pale in the moonlight. His eyes met mine through the glass, and he smiled. I've been waiting. My body locked. Every part of me screamed to run, to fight, to do anything but open that door. But another part, weak breaking, ached at the sight of him. At the memory of nights we spent camping as kids, at the way he'd been my anchor when I drifted. My hand twitched toward the lock. Then his smile widened, too wide. The skin at his cheeks split, stretching until it tore. His jaw unhinged, opening too far, teeth glinting like shards of bone. The sound that poured out wasn't his voice anymore. It was a chorus, low, guttural, dozens of mouths layered together, all whispering the same word. Stay. I screamed and threw myself back, knife clattering against the floor. The shape slammed its palm against the glass, the van rocking with the force. Cracks spidered through the window, mist bleeding inside. I lunged for the driver's seat, fumbling the keys with shaking hands, engine coughing to life. The van lurched forward, tires spitting mud, clearing the space with a desperate roar. In the mirror, the figure didn't chase. It just stood there, mouth gaping, smile splitting wider until it blurred into the fog. I didn't stop driving. Not for an hour. Not for 2. Every bend in the road looked the same. Every shadow pressed closer, but I didn't dare slow down. Exhaustion gnawed at me, eyes burning, hands numb, until at last the fuel gauge bottomed out. The van sputtered, lurched, and died on a narrow stretch of gravel. Darkness swallowed me again. I sat in the silence, forehead pressed to the wheel, body shaking. No more roads, no more choices, just me and the Appalachian night. The knock started almost immediately. Not 3, not frantic, a steady rhythm, patient, deliberate, as if reminding me that it could wait forever. And I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that I wasn't leaving those mountains. Not tonight, maybe not ever. The knocks didn't stop. They shifted places. First at the back doors, then along the side panels, then above, drumming against the thin metal roof like a hand tapping on glass. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, knife gripped so tight it cut into my palm, blood slicking the handle. My breaths came shallow, sharp, every exhale fogging the windshield. I whispered to myself, a mantra to keep from unraveling, it's not real, it's not real, it's not real. But the Appalachians don't care what you tell yourself. They rewrite real. The knocks stilled. Silence dropped heavy, crushing the air out of my lungs. Then, slowly, a scraping sound began. Fingernails, or something like them, dragging down the van's side. The screech vibrated through the metal, set my teeth on edge. It crawled from one window to the next, circling, hunting. I clamped my hands over my ears, rocking back and forth like a child. But the sound drilled in anyway until I snapped. I lunged for the door, yanked it open, and stumbled into the night with the knife raised. The forest met me in silence. No movement, no sound. Just mist swirling at my ankles and the faint coppery stink of wet earth. My chest heaved as I spun, blade flashing in the pale light. Nothing but endless trees. And then, faintly from the dark, my own voice. Eli. I froze. The knife trembled. The sound came again, drifting from deeper in the hollow. My voice exact, calling itself. Eli, come here. Every instinct screamed at me to run back into the van, but my legs moved forward, slow, weak, as if strings pulled me from the inside. The fog thickened, swallowing trunks, softening shapes until the world narrowed to a tunnel of gray. My own voice echoed through it, coaxing, and then the ground shifted under me. At first, it felt like soft soil, damp from rain, but then it gave deeper, sucking at my boots. My heart lurched. I was sinking. The hollow was swallowing me. I thrashed, knife flailing, mud pulling harder. My thighs sank, then my waist, cold muck clamping around me like jaws. I screamed, clawing at the earth, nails tearing, but the mud only pulled tighter. The mist churned, and from its shapes leaned close. Faces. Dozens, pale and blurred, mouths open wide as if gasping for breath. Their hands reached, slick and skeletal, dragging at my arms, pressing against my chest. My knife slipped from my grasp, swallowed whole. No, I shouted, choking as muck splashed into my mouth. Panic burned in my veins, brighter than fear. I kicked, flailed, shoved against those reaching hands until, with a desperate heave, I found purchase on a root. My fingers locked around it, tendons screaming, as I hauled myself inch by inch out of the mire. The faces vanished, the mist thinned, and suddenly I was on solid ground again, knees in the dirt, chest heaving, every muscle shaking. I spat mud, wiped at my eyes, and staggered to my feet. The hollow behind me was silent, untouched, as if it hadn't tried to consume me whole. I ran. Branches tore at my arms, roots tripped my feet, but I didn't stop until the van loomed out of the mist like a broken promise. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and collapsed on the floor, sobbing into my sleeve. I don't know how long I lay there. Minutes, hours. The forest outside stayed quiet, as if watching me through the thin metal walls. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me under, though sleep brought no peace. I dreamed of roads folding in on themselves, of cabins breathing smoke, of my brother's face splitting into a smile too wide. I dreamed of knocking that came from inside my chest, echoing against my ribs like something trying to get out. When I woke, the van smelled like rot, damp, sour, like leaves decaying underfoot. I sat up, head pounding, and froze. Every window was covered, not with fog, not with condensation, with handprints. Dozens, hundreds, pressed from the outside in, palms flat, fingers splayed, smeared streaks dragging down the glass. They circled the entire van, layer on layer, some small like children, others impossibly large. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My hands shook as I fumbled for the knife I'd lost, forgetting it was gone. My chest caved in with the certainty that no matter how fast I drove, no matter what road I took, I wasn't leaving. The mountains had me. The knocks came again, soft this time, like fingertips rapping politely on the glass, a rhythm almost playful. And then in a chorus of whispers that slid through the walls, through the air, through my bones, stay. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound wasn't in the air anymore. It was inside me, crawling down my throat, pressing against the cage of my chest. My own voice joined it, unwilling, whispering the same word back. Stay. Tears streaked my face as I curled on the floor, rocking, begging anything listening to let me go, to let me leave. But the whispers only swelled, filling every hollow space inside me until I couldn't tell where my voice ended and theirs began. And in that moment, I understood. The Appalachians don't kill you. Not outright. They wear you down. They whisper until you forget you ever wanted to leave. Until the thought of escape feels like betrayal. Until the word stay feels like home. I pressed the knife wound in my palm to my lips, tasting iron, grounding myself in pain, in the reminder that I was still me, that I hadn't surrendered yet. Not fully, but the knocks never stopped, and neither did the whispers. I don't remember deciding to move. One moment I was huddled on the floor of the van, listening to the knocks crawl across the windows like rain, and the next I was throwing open the door, stumbling barefoot into the mist. The cold bit at my skin, sharp enough to wake me from the trance that whispered stay with every heartbeat. The forest swallowed me instantly. The van behind me blurred, swallowed by fog, its shape dissolving until it was nothing more than a dark shadow. I didn't look back. Every nerve screamed at me to keep going, to put distance between myself and that cage of glass and whispers. The trees loomed higher with each step, trunks slick with moss, their branches tangling into patterns that seemed almost deliberate. I kept my hands out, brushing against bark, grounding myself in touch. The smell of rot grew stronger, thick in my nostrils, as if the forest exhaled decay. And then I heard it again. Footsteps, not mine. Soft, deliberate crunches in the leaves, always just a few paces behind. I froze, chest heaving, knifeless hand trembling. The sound stopped. I turned, eyes straining through the mist. Nothing. I pressed forward, faster this time, stumbling over roots, ignoring the scratches of brambles tearing my arms. The footsteps returned. Closer now, matching my pace, mirroring my stumbles. "Leave me alone," I shouted, voice cracking. The forest answered with silence, but the footsteps stopped only when I stopped, starting again when I moved. Always pacing me, just beyond sight. My throat tightened, tears burning. I wanted to believe it was an animal, some curious creature shadowing me, but deep down I knew better. Animals don't mimic. They don't wait for you to notice. After what felt like hours, the trees broke. I stumbled into another clearing. This one smaller, ringed by jagged rocks jutting from the soil like broken teeth. At the center, half buried in moss, stood a stone marker, weathered, cracked, but unmistakable. A grave. I staggered closer, breath hitching. The inscription was nearly worn away, letters eroded by rain and time, but I made out enough. Eli Carter. My name. Beneath it, a date. The very day I had driven into the mountains. My vision tunneled. My knees buckled. I collapsed into the damp soil, staring at the marker as if the earth itself mocked me. I was still alive, breath in my lungs, blood in my veins. But the mountain had already written me into its ledger, already claimed me. A low wind stirred, whistling through the stones. The footsteps behind me stopped, and then a voice drifted, curling through the mist, close as breath against my ear. "We told you to stay." I spun, heart clawing at my ribs. A figure stood at the tree line, my own silhouette. Same build, same posture. It stepped closer, and in the weak light I saw its face. My face. But its eyes were wrong, too dark, too deep, endless pits that swallowed light. And when it smiled, the same too wide grin split its cheeks, just like the false Matthew I'd seen before. I stumbled back, shaking my head, whispering, No, you're not me." It tilted its head mockingly. "I am what stays." The thing stepped over the grave marker, bare feet silent on the moss, closing the distance between us. My chest heaved, mind screaming for escape, but my body locked. It was like staring into a mirror that wanted to step out and take your place. Then it lunged. I bolted sideways, legs fueled by raw terror, weaving between the jagged rocks. My double's footsteps thundered behind me, faster, heavier, the sound vibrating in my bones. Branches whipped my face as I tore into the trees, lungs burning, tears streaming. I didn't dare look back. The forest bent around me, twisting paths into spirals, each tree looking like the last. I ran until my legs gave, until I collapsed against a trunk, chest splitting with gasps, my ears strained. Silence. Had I lost it? The question barely formed before the knock came. From inside the tree I leaned on, hollow, 3 steady raps echoing up the trunk and into my spine. I screamed, shoved away, staggered blindly until the world blurred into gray and black. My knees hit soil, my palms scraped stone, and I realized I'd stumbled into another clearing. This one smaller, tighter, almost circular. In the center stood a fire. Not mine. Not natural. A tall flame burning steady without fuel, its light too white, too cold. Shadows bent wrong in its glow, stretching toward me instead of away. Shapes circled the flame. Dozens. Pale, human-like figures with blurred faces, hands too long, bodies swaying like reeds. They whispered together, a hiss of voices layered into a wordless chant. And then all at once they turned their faces toward me. I staggered back, bile rising, but their voices swelled, filling the clearing, echoing off the trees. Stay, stay, stay. My knees buckled, my mind fractured. I clutched my head, screaming against the tide of sound. But the word burrowed deep, rooting itself into thought, into blood. For a heartbeat, I wanted to. I wanted to lay down by that flame, let the forest close over me and stay forever. But then I remembered the grave. My name carved into stone, the date already etched. I wasn't dead yet. I wouldn't let them write my ending. I forced my legs to move, stumbled backward, then ran, half blind, crashing through branches, tearing skin, lungs burning. The chanting followed, echoing long after I left the fire's glow, until the night itself pulsed with that single command. Stay. I didn't stop running until my body gave out. I collapsed into the roots of a massive oak, curling into the earth, every nerve frayed. My chest heaved, mud caked my hands, and my ears still rang with the whisper that refused to die. But beneath it, faint, I thought I heard something new. Not a whisper, not a knock, a voice, a real one, human, calling through the trees. Hello? I froze, blood running cold. The voice came again, closer now. Hey, you out here? I wanted to believe, to hope, to trust. But hope had become dangerous here. And in the Appalachian night, even human voices wore masks. The voice cut through the night like a blade. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I crouched lower against the oak roots, mud caked to my arms, heart thundering in my throat. It was a man's voice, steady, strong, the kind that made you want to believe. Hello? Anyone out here? I swallowed hard. My mouth felt dry as ash. Logic whispered that no one should be here, that no hiker, no ranger, no passerby would stumble through these woods at this hour, not when the mist pressed so heavy and the silence smothered all else. But another part of me, desperate, breaking, ached to answer, to let myself believe that I wasn't completely alone. I hesitated. Then, against all instinct, I whispered back, here. The woods swallowed the word as if testing whether it belonged, and then the voice came again, clearer now, closer. Stay where you are. I'm coming. I gripped the roots tighter. My skin crawled. Stay. That word again. But maybe this was different. Maybe it was rescue. The mist parted slightly, and a figure emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed like a hiker in a weathered jacket, a headlamp cutting through the dark. Relief crashed over me so hard my knees buckled. For the first time in hours, maybe days, I saw something human. He raised a hand in greeting. You're not safe out here. Come with me. I wanted to run into that light, into that voice, into the promise of safety. But my gut twisted, sharp and sudden. The cadence of his voice, too smooth, too measured. Each word pronounced with the same rhythm, like reciting. Who are you? I croaked. My voice ragged. He paused. Just a second too long. Then, a ranger. You need to come now. My skin prickled. Something was off. No ranger would be alone at night without radio, without gear, without a sign of authority. And the way he stood, too still, headlamp beam not swaying like it should. I forced myself to stay rooted. My chest heaved. If you're a ranger, I rasped, what's the name of the closest station? Silence. The figure tilted its head. Slowly, too slowly. Then it smiled, a wide white grin catching in the glow of the lamp. You shouldn't be here alone. The words slid wrong in my ears. My stomach lurched. I staggered back, shaking my head. No, 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 no. The light flickered. The figure stepped forward, and in that flicker, its face blurred, mouth stretching, eyes hollowing, skin rippling like water disturbed. I ran. Branches snapped against my arms, roots clawed my feet, but terror burned fuel I didn't know I had left. Behind me, footsteps thundered. Not soft like before. Heavy. Inhuman. Each impact shook the ground as if the forest itself chased me. I didn't dare look back. My lungs screamed, my legs buckled, but I pushed on until I burst through the trees and into another clearing. This one wasn't empty. An old church stood at its center, whitewashed wood peeled gray, steeple cracked and leaning, stained glass windows fractured into shards. The door hung crooked, wind moaning through the gaps. I didn't think. I bolted inside, slamming the door shut behind me, chest heaving. The air inside was damp, thick with mildew. Pews lay rotted, hymnals scattered and swollen with mold. The altar stood warped, a wooden cross above it leaning precarious. I stumbled down the aisle, collapsed against a pew, trying to steady my breath. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard it hurt. For the first time since the grave, since the cabin, since the whispers, I felt a sliver of shelter. Thin, fragile, but real. And then I saw the carvings. Every pew, every wall, even the altar. The same symbol. The circle split by a line slashed 3 times at the base, gouged over and over, layers upon layers, until the wood bled splinters. My gut twisted. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a shrine. A low creak echoed from the door. My breath caught. Slowly I turned. The door was still shut, but the wood bowed inward as if something pressed against it. Knocks began, slow, steady, patient. Then the whispering rose, seeping through the cracks. Stay, stay, stay. I stumbled back, eyes darting for escape. The stained glass windows were shattered, jagged but open. I lunged for one, climbing onto the sill, glass biting into my hands. The whispers swelled, the door bowing harder, and for a heartbeat, I thought the entire church would collapse inward. I pulled myself through, tumbling into wet grass outside. My hands bled, my knees scraped raw, but I didn't stop. I ran behind the church into the trees, deeper and deeper until the whispers thinned, swallowed by distance. At last, I collapsed against a log, chest burning, tears streaking mud on my cheeks. My whole body shook, skin clammy, vision tunneling. The forest loomed endless around me, the night thick and eternal. I didn't know if dawn would ever come, but one truth carved itself into me like the symbols on those pews. The mountains weren't letting me go. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I must have blacked out against that log, because when my eyes opened again, the forest was gray with early light. Not bright, never bright, but enough to thin the mist, enough to make me hope. My body ached in every joint, scratches burning, muscles trembling from exhaustion. Still, the fact that I'd woken at all felt like a victory. For a moment, I just sat there, breathing in the damp air, and listening to the tentative calls of morning birds. It felt almost normal, almost like the world outside had reclaimed the woods, pushing back the nightmare of the night. But then I saw it. A trail. Not a road, not gravel, an old footpath, winding narrow through the trees. The dirt was pressed with fresh impressions. Human. Bare. The same size as mine. They trailed along the path and disappeared into the deeper woods. My chest tightened. I should have turned away. I should have run in the opposite direction, but something in me whispered that this was it, the way out, or at least an answer. So I followed. The trail wound through ridges and gullies, up over mossy rocks, down into hollows where the mist clung thickest. My breath came harsh, my stomach twisting with each step. Hours seemed to pass. The prints continued, always fresh, always clear, as if they'd been laid down just ahead of me. And then the trees opened. I found myself standing at the edge of a wide meadow. Grass rippled in a wind I couldn't feel, pale wildflowers bent low, and at the far side stood a row of RVs. My knees nearly gave out. There must have been a dozen of them, lined up in crooked rows, their paint faded, windows streaked, some old Volkswagens like mine, others larger rigs, fifth wheels, even a rusted bus. For one impossible moment, relief surged. People. Civilization, maybe others like me who'd made it out. I stumbled into the meadow, legs weak, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" The silence that answered felt too complete. I moved closer, weaving between the RVs. Their doors hung open, some ripped from hinges, others sagging. Inside, the air stank of mildew, metal, and rot. Beds sat unmade, dishes rusted in sinks, belongings scattered as if their owners had simply vanished mid-motion. A Volkswagen camper van leaned crooked on flat tires. Its curtains were drawn, its paint flaked. My chest tightened as I stepped closer. Something about it felt familiar, too familiar. I reached for the handle and pulled the door. It creaked open, and the world dropped out from under me. Inside sat my own belongings, my blanket folded on the seat, my kettle resting on the stove, my journal on the counter, the one I'd left in my van. I staggered back, bile burning my throat. "No," I whispered. "No, that's not." But when I looked again, it wasn't just one. Every RV in that meadow, every rig, every van, every bus was a reflection. Each one held pieces of me. A shirt draped over a chair I'd lost weeks ago, a photo tucked into a cracked mirror, my handwriting carved into a wooden table. I stumbled through them, choking on air, hands trembling. Every vehicle was mine, versions of mine, versions of my life scattered, abandoned, half-lived. And then I saw the graves. Behind the meadow in neat crooked rows, the earth had been turned. Markers leaned against stones, against trees, against broken branches. Each one bore a name. My name, Eli Carter. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe, stretching as far as the mist allowed me to see. Dates stacked atop dates, looping, repeating, some etched with today, some with tomorrow, some with years I hadn't yet lived. The ground tilted under me, my legs gave way, and I dropped to my knees, sobbing into the damp grass. The mountains hadn't just trapped me, they had multiplied me, splintered me into endless pieces, burying each one like a secret they never intended to tell. A knock sounded. I lifted my head, tears blurring the graves. The knock came again, hollow, echoing. I turned, throat raw, and saw the closest RV, my own reflection of a van. Its window fogged, a hand pressed against the glass from inside. The hand moved, 3 raps against the window. Then again. Then again. I staggered to my feet, backing away as the knocking spread. Every RV in the meadow, each one thudding in rhythm. Dozens of fists slamming hollow against glass and metal. The sound rose like thunder, shaking the ground, rattling the air until it drowned everything else. And then they stopped. The doors opened, all at once. Figures stepped out. Dozens. Hundreds. All of them, me. My face, my body, my gait. Each one dressed in scraps of my life, shirts I'd worn, jackets I'd lost, boots caked in the same mud. Their eyes met mine, blank and endless, mouths curling into the same stretched smile. One stepped forward, bare feet silent on the grass. Its voice was my own, layered with whispers, echoing through the meadow. "You see now. You never leave. You only stay." The others repeated, a chorus of me, voices rolling like thunder. "Stay, stay, stay." My chest seized. My vision blurred. I turned and ran, through the graves, through the mist, stumbling blind as the chant swelled behind me. My lungs burned, my legs buckled, but I didn't stop until the meadow disappeared, swallowed by the trees. I collapsed in the hollow earth, gasping, shaking, the chant still echoing in my skull. And in that moment, I knew the truth. It wasn't the knocks, it wasn't the whispers, it wasn't the graves. The real horror of the Appalachians was that no matter how far I ran, I would always find myself again. I don't remember how long I lay there in the hollow, chest heaving, my body trembling like a string pulled too tight. The forest was silent again, oppressive, watchful, as if it was waiting for me to stand, to choose a direction, to keep playing its game. My mind kept replaying the meadow, the rows of RVs, the graves carved with my name. Every blink brought flashes of those faces. My own face, multiplied, smiling too wide. I wanted to give up, to sink into the soil, let the mountains have me, let the chant of stay hollow me out until I couldn't resist anymore. But something inside, small and stubborn, clawed against it. Not strength, not bravery, just refusal. Refusal to let them decide how it ended. I dragged myself to my feet, every muscle screaming, and staggered forward. The woods closed in, branches clutching, mist curling. Time lost meaning. Hours, maybe days, blurred together in a haze of hunger and exhaustion. The knocks never stopped. Sometimes on tree trunks ahead of me, sometimes from roots beneath the ground, sometimes faint against my own skull as if the forest had found a way inside. And then I smelled it. Smoke. Thin, acrid, curling through the damp air, not the cold smoke of the cabin's lantern. Real smoke. A fire. I followed it, half lurching, half running, until the trees broke again, and there it was. A camp. Not like mine. Not like the ghost RVs in the meadow. This was real. A fire pit burned steady, ringed by stones. A tent leaned under the weight of dew. A lantern hung from a branch, casting a soft yellow glow. And by the fire sat a man. He was older, maybe late 50s, with a lined face and a heavy beard. He wore a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled, hands steady as he poked at the flames with a stick. When his eyes lifted to mine, I nearly collapsed with relief. "Jesus," I gasped, stumbling forward. "Thank God." He raised a hand, quieting me. His eyes narrowed, scanning me from head to toe. I must have looked like hell, mud-smeared, bleeding, wild-eyed. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. The words sliced me, my chest seized. That phrase again. Always that phrase. I froze mid-step, suspicion crawling up my throat. "Who are you?" He tilted his head, considering. "Just someone who's been here longer than most." My legs trembled. What is this place? What's happening to me? He didn't answer right away. He just stared into the fire, watching the flames twist and dance. Finally, he said, "The mountains don't like to let go. They hold on to people, test them, sometimes break them, sometimes replace them." My breath hitched. "Replace," he nodded once. "You've seen them, the doubles, the graves. You're not the first, you won't be the last." I staggered closer to the fire, its warmth wrapping me like a fragile shield. "How do I get out?" I begged. "There has to be a way. Tell me how." His eyes lifted, pale in the glow. "You don't leave. You endure. And maybe if the mountains decide you've paid enough, they let you walk back down. But you never really escape. Part of you always stays." My stomach dropped. The words settled heavy, final. "No," I whispered. "I can't accept that." He leaned closer, voice low. "Then you'll die fighting, just like me." I blinked, confusion breaking through despair. "You're alive." He smiled, thin, bitter. "Am I?" And then the firelight shifted. For a split second his face flickered, skin melting to pale blur, eyes hollowing black, mouth stretching into that same impossible grin. The flames hissed, the air thickened, and I stumbled back, heart hammering. He chuckled, the sound layered with whispers. "Or maybe I'm just what stays." The fire roared high, white flames clawing at the sky, shadows whipping across the clearing like living things. The man, no, the thing, rose slowly, towering, his outline shifting, blurring, stretching too tall, too thin. I turned and ran. The forest swallowed me again, branches tearing my skin, roots catching my feet. Behind me, the whispers swelled, layered voices chasing, the words stay pounding like drums in my skull. I ran until my lungs tore, until my legs buckled, until I collapsed once more in the dirt. And when I lifted my head, I saw it. The road. Gravel, narrow, lined with trees, the same road I had driven in on. My chest seized, my heart pounded. Could it be real this time? I dragged myself up, staggered onto the gravel, tears streaming. I followed it, step after step, each one a prayer. The trees thinned, the mist lifted, and there, faint but real, I saw light. Headlights. A car. It rumbled slowly down the road, its beams cutting through the dark. I stumbled into the lane, waving my arms, screaming until my voice broke. The vehicle screeched, tires spitting gravel, headlights blinding me. A window rolled down. A woman's voice, sharp with alarm. "Jesus, are you okay?" My knees gave and I collapsed in front of her car, sobbing, choking out words. "Help me. Please. Get me out of here." She jumped out, hands gripping my shoulders, eyes wide as she looked me over. She felt real, warm, solid. For the first time, hope lit inside me. But then, over her shoulder, in the glow of her taillights, I saw the tree line, and dozens of figures stood there, all me, silent, still, smiling. The woman gripped my shoulders tighter as I stared past her, frozen, watching the tree line. The figures didn't move. They just stood there, half shrouded in mist, lined up like sentinels, dozens of them, all me. Same frame, same face, same torn clothes, all smiling that stretched, impossible grin. Hey, stay with me," she said, shaking me. Her touch was warm, grounding, but my eyes kept darting back to the trees. My other selves hadn't stepped forward, hadn't spoken, but I could feel their voices crawling inside my skull, whispering in rhythm with my heartbeat. Stay, stay, stay. I clutched the woman's arm, my voice cracked and wild. Please, you don't see them? She glanced over her shoulder, frowning. There's no one there. The words gutted me. My knees buckled, and she caught me, straining under my weight. No one there. Either the mountains had driven me past the edge, or they'd cloaked their truth from anyone but me. Either way, I was alone in the seeing. Come on, she said firmly, dragging me toward her car. We need to get you to a hospital. You look like hell. The figures stayed at the tree line, silent, their grins never breaking. I tried not to look as she shoved me into the passenger seat. The upholstery smelled faintly of pine air freshener and coffee. Mundane. Safe. So normal it felt like another hallucination. She started the engine, headlights flaring, and for the first time since I'd entered the mountains, I felt the possibility of escape. The car lurched forward, gravel crunching under tires, and the figures receded into the fog. But as we drove, I couldn't stop shaking. My hands trembled against my knees, my chest still hitching with shallow breaths. She kept glancing at me, concern etched deep in her brow. You camping out here alone? She asked softly. The question twisted like a knife. My voice rasped. Yeah, mistake. Her eyes flicked to the road, then back to me. Not the first I've picked up out here. My heart stuttered. What do you mean? She didn't answer, just pressed her lips into a tight line, headlights carving through the fog. I stared at her hands gripping the wheel, at the way her knuckles didn't shift when we hit bumps, at the way her face never flickered in the passing light. Too steady, too smooth. A chill ran through me. Who are you? I whispered. This time she smiled, not wide, not monstrous, just soft, knowing. But her eyes never left the road. I'm the one who drives you out. My throat closed. Drives me out? Her smile lingered. Everyone needs a ride eventually. I pressed back into the seat, trembling. The world outside blurred, trees streaking into gray walls. I wanted to believe her, to believe I was being taken somewhere real, somewhere safe. But doubt gnawed, sharp and relentless. What if this was just another loop, another trick, another version of me waiting to bury itself in my skin? We drove in silence for what felt like hours. My eyelids grew heavy, my body finally surrendering to exhaustion. I fought to stay awake, to keep one eye on the woman, but the weight of everything, the knocks, the whispers, the graves, pulled me under. When I woke, daylight streamed through the windshield. Real daylight, golden, warm, cutting through clear air. The mist was gone, the mountains had thinned to rolling hills, and in the distance I saw rooftops, a town. I broke. Tears spilled down my face as relief gutted me. Oh God, I'm out. The woman slowed the car at the edge of town, pulling onto the shoulder. She cut the engine and turned to me. Her expression was unreadable. This is as far as I go, she said. My lips trembled. Thank you. I don't know how. She shook her head, cutting me off. Don't thank me, just remember. Remember what? I whispered. Her smile widened, and in it I caught a flicker, a shadow, subtle, almost hidden, too familiar. That you'll always stay. My chest caved. My hands clawed at the door, fumbling it open. I stumbled onto the gravel shoulder, gasping in the crisp morning air, the town just ahead. When I turned back, the car was gone. Not driving away, just gone. The road behind me was empty. I staggered toward town, half running, half falling, desperate to anchor myself to something real. People. Buildings. Any proof I'd escaped. And when I reached the first gas station, its bell chiming as I pushed through the door, I nearly collapsed in relief at the sight of fluorescent lights and a clerk behind the counter. He looked up, startled at the wreck I must have appeared. Rough night? He asked cautiously. I opened my mouth to speak, to pour out everything, to beg for someone to believe me. But then I froze. Behind him, taped to the wall, was a missing persons flyer. The photo was faded, the paper curled at the edges. My face stared back at me. Missing, Eli Carter. Last seen camping alone in the Appalachian Mountains. The clerk followed my gaze, then looked back at me. His expression shifted, something cold flickering in his eyes. "You shouldn't be here alone," he murmured. The words dropped like stones in my gut. My vision tunneled. The whispers rose again, faint but rising, like curling from the corners of the store. "Stay, stay, stay." I stumbled back through the door, heart pounding, lungs herrings tearing. The town stretched ahead, too still, too quiet. Every window reflected my face, every reflection smiled. And in that moment, I understood the final truth. The mountains had never let me leave. They never do. I used to think water was the most peaceful sound in the world. The gentle lap of a lake against the shoreline, the steady rhythm of rain on an RV roof, even the trickle of a creek nearby, all of it made me feel calm, as if the noise itself washed away whatever worries I carried into the campground. But sometimes even the purest sounds take on a weight you can't explain. Sometimes the very thing that comforts you in daylight turns into something heavy and wrong once night falls. That's how it started. With a splash. I was 36 years old when I took my RV out to Lake Monona Campground in Wisconsin. It wasn't far from Madison, not exactly wilderness, but it had enough quiet corners to make you forget the city wasn't too far away. I'd been traveling alone for a while, not out of choice, but because that's the way things had worked out. My marriage had ended, my job allowed me to work remotely, and the road seemed like the one place where I could figure myself out again. I thought the solitude would help me heal. When I arrived, it was mid-afternoon in early September. The campground was dotted with a few other rigs, retirees mostly, couples sitting out in folding chairs with their dogs curled at their feet, the smell of coffee and wood smoke weaving together. I picked a spot near the waterline, under a spread of pines that swayed with the kind of softness that makes you believe they're whispering. My sight gave me a clear view of the lake, a still sheet of glass reflecting back the pale blue sky. I remember thinking I'd chosen perfectly. That night, after dinner, I pulled a chair closer to the shore with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The lake was so still it looked unreal, the kind of calm you see in paintings where the brushstrokes never move. I should have felt peaceful. I tried to. But the longer I sat there, the more that silence pressed in. It was too clean, too flawless, like the whole lake was holding its breath. And then, cutting through it, came the sound. A splash. It wasn't the quick plop of a fish or the delicate ripple of a bird landing. This was different, heavy, like someone had thrown a rock the size of a cinder block straight into the center of the lake. I leaned forward, scanning the water, waiting for rings to break the surface, for movement, for something. But there was nothing. No ripples, no disturbance, just the glassy stillness staring back at me. I told myself it had to be a fish, a big one, maybe a muskie or a carp. I even smiled a little, convincing myself I'd just heard the lake's secret life playing out. I wanted to believe that explanation. I wanted to tuck it away and let it go. But then it happened again. The same deep splash, same direction, somewhere out in the middle. And once again, when I searched for proof, the lake showed nothing. Just perfect, flat silence. By the time I went inside the RV, I had talked myself down. I remember locking the door, climbing into bed, and telling myself I was being foolish. Every lake makes noise. Every stretch of water has its own rhythm, and if you listen long enough, you'll hear it. That was all this was. But around 3 a.m, I woke up to it again. The same splash, dragging me out of sleep like someone had dropped something inside my head. I sat up in bed, heart hammering, listening. Nothing. Just the soft tick of the RV's cooling metal and the faint rustle of wind against canvas. I pulled the curtains back and looked toward the water. The moon lit the lake in silver, untouched, unbroken. I almost laughed at myself, but the laugh caught in my throat because even as I stared, I heard it again. A splash. That time I couldn't ignore how wrong it sounded. Not just heavy, deliberate, like something was repeating itself. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. I brewed coffee, walked the shoreline, even chatted with the couple parked a few sites over. Tom and Joanne, Late 60s, sweet people traveling with a golden retriever named Daisy. They'd been staying at Lake Monona every September for years. When I asked casually if they ever heard anything strange on the water, Joanne smiled and said, "Oh, you mean the splash? Everyone hears it sooner or later." My stomach tightened. "The splash?" Tom nodded, scratching Daisy behind the ears. "Happens at night. Sounds like someone throwing a boulder in. Never see anything, though. Just one of the lake's quirks, I guess." They said it lightly, like it was an inside joke between them and the campground. But I could see it in their eyes, that flicker of unease people try to cover with a smile. I didn't push. I just nodded, thanked them, and went back to my site. But the weight of it stayed with me. By the second night, I couldn't stop listening for it. Every time the wind shifted, every time a bird called, I braced myself. And sure enough, it came. Splash after splash, always the same distance away, always without evidence. At one point, I even turned on my flashlight, aiming it over the water, hoping to catch something. Nothing, just stillness, as if the sound had no source at all. I told myself I'd only stay one more night. But that decision unraveled when I met Brian. He was about my age, maybe a year or two younger, and parked his small Class B van a few sites down from me on the third evening. We started talking after he waved while I was filling my water tank. He was easy to talk to, one of those people who seemed to carry stories the way other folks carried tools. He'd been traveling for months, chasing quiet places, working freelance. When I mentioned I'd been hearing something strange, he leaned in, interested. "The splash?" he asked, almost eagerly. When I nodded, he smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reaches your eyes. "I've heard it too. Been to a few campgrounds like this. Always the same sound. Always the same time." "The same time?" I asked. He glanced toward the lake, then back at me. "Middle of the night. Always between 2 and 3, like clockwork." The certainty in his voice chilled me. He wasn't guessing. He knew. That night when I lay in bed, I kept thinking about what he'd said. And sure enough, sometime after 2, the splash came. Louder than ever. So loud I felt it in my chest. I waited, holding my breath, staring at the ceiling. Then it came again. And again. Each one spaced perfectly apart, like something was counting. 3 splashes. Then silence. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just afraid. I felt like the sound was calling me. I lay there, staring at the dark ceiling of the RV, my breath shallow, the silence between each splash somehow louder than the noise itself. 3 splashes, evenly spaced, like a ritual, like the water itself was speaking in a language I didn't understand. My chest tightened with every second that passed after the third one. The silence felt wrong, like it wasn't silence at all but a pause, a waiting. I wanted to roll over, to force myself to sleep, to shut it all out. My body wouldn't move. It was like I was pinned in place, heart rattling against my ribs, ears straining for anything else. When nothing came, I finally swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The RV's floor was cold beneath my bare feet, grounding me, reminding me I was still here, still real. I told myself I'd just peek outside, just to prove to myself that nothing was there. Just the lake, just still water. I pulled the curtain back. The moon had shifted lower, its reflection cutting across the water like a silver knife. The surface was calm, no ripples, no disturbance, nothing to explain what I'd heard. But as I stared, I thought I saw something. A darker patch, far out, just where the moonlight broke. It wasn't big, just a shadow, barely visible, but it was moving. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Gone. I stepped back, pulling the curtain closed, suddenly angry at myself. I wasn't some kid spooked by campfire stories. I'd camped enough to know that lakes made noises, that shadows tricked you, that night played games with the mind. That had to be it. It had to. But sleep didn't come easy. By morning, I was exhausted, the kind of tired that makes you see the world through a fog. I brewed coffee and tried to shake it off but the tension sat in my shoulders like a weight I couldn't set down. I almost packed up and left right then. Almost. But when I stepped outside, Brian was there, leaning against his van, sipping from a mug. He gave me a look that told me everything. He hadn't slept much either. You heard it again, didn't you? He asked. I nodded. 3 times? The words hung heavy between us. I didn't answer, but he didn't need me to. His face said he already knew. I tried something last night, he said, lowering his voice. I timed it. From the first splash to the second, exactly 47 seconds. From the second to the third, the same. Not 46, not 48, 47 on the dot. Hearing it framed like that made my skin crawl. It wasn't random. It wasn't natural. It was deliberate. Brian set his mug down on the picnic table and leaned closer. I think it's a signal. I laughed, too quickly, too harshly. A signal? From what? He shrugged. That's the thing. Maybe from under the water, maybe from something else. But it's not just noise. It's communication. I shook my head, trying to brush it off, but his words rooted themselves deep. A signal. Repeating. 47 seconds apart. The idea gnawed at me all day. By evening, I was restless. I walked the campground loop, passing other rigs, families laughing around campfires, the smell of charred hot dogs and marshmallows drifting on the air. To them, this was just another night. They weren't listening. They weren't waiting. I envied them. When I got back to my site, Brian was waiting. He had a flashlight in one hand, a determined look on his face. Come down to the shore with me, he said. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me not to. But something stronger pulled me. Curiosity, maybe, or the need to know I wasn't losing my mind. So I followed him. We stood side by side at the edge of the lake, the flashlight beam cutting across the surface. It lit nothing but water, still as glass, reflecting the stars. My pulse quickened. Then it came. The splash. The sound was so heavy, so close, it rattled the shoreline. My chest tightened, but I didn't move. I forced myself to stare at the water. 47 seconds later, another splash. Then another. Brian clicked his watch. Exactly, he whispered. The last splash faded and silence pressed in around us. I thought that was it, the pattern complete. But then Brian did something I'll never forget. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted out over the water. 1. His voice echoed, bouncing back from the opposite shore. For a long moment, nothing happened. My skin prickled, my mouth dry. And then, splash, a 4th one. My knees went weak. I staggered back, shaking my head. No, 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 no. Brian's face lit with something between fear and fascination. It responded. I grabbed his arm. We need to go, now. But he didn't move. He just stared at the water, eyes wide, breathing shallow. And as I pulled at him, I realized something. He didn't want to leave. He wanted to hear more. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept circling back to that 4th splash, that response. The lake wasn't just making noise, it was listening. The next morning, I tried again to convince myself to leave. I even packed some of my gear, loaded things back into the RV, but as I tightened the last strap, I caught sight of Brian sitting cross-legged by the water, notebook in hand, scribbling furiously. He looked obsessed. I walked over, intending to tell him goodbye, to wish him luck, but instead I found myself asking, "What are you writing?" "Patterns," he said, not looking up. "The intervals, the timing. If it's communication, maybe it's math. Maybe it's something we can decode." I shook my head. "You sound insane." "Do I?" He finally looked at me, eyes sharp, almost feverish. "Or do I sound like someone paying attention?" I couldn't answer, because a part of me, the part that hadn't stopped thinking about it, wondered if he was right. That night, I stayed inside my RV, curtains drawn tight, trying to block it all out. But the splashes came anyway, shaking through the silence, threading themselves into my bones. 47 seconds apart. 3 times. Then silence. Waiting. I pressed my hands over my ears, whispering to myself, begging for sleep, for peace. And just when I thought I drifted off, I heard it. A 4th splash. This time, I hadn't called out. Neither had Brian. Whatever was out there, it didn't need us to respond anymore. I lay there in the dark, my whole body trembling. That 4th splash was louder than the rest, closer, as if it had moved toward shore. I didn't even want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I pulled the curtain back just enough to peek through. Moonlight carved a silver path across the lake. For a moment, nothing moved. Nothing seemed out of place. But then I noticed it. faint ripples radiating outward, spreading toward me. I told myself it was the wind, a fish, anything else, but the air was still and no fish made ripples that wide, that steady. I shut the curtain hard, stepped back, and pressed my back against the RV wall like a child hiding from something under the bed. My chest heaved, shallow and quick, until I thought I might pass out. Morning didn't feel like relief. The light didn't wash away the dread. If anything, it deepened it because daylight erased excuses. I couldn't tell myself I dreamed it or imagined it. The lake had responded, and now it was reaching closer. When I finally stepped outside, Brian was already waiting by the shore. He looked different, wired, restless, as if he hadn't slept a second. His notebook was open on his lap, covered in numbers, sketches, little arrows pointing to words I couldn't quite read. "You heard it," he said, not even glancing up. "I don't want to talk about it," I muttered, tightening the strap on my cooler I was getting ready to leave. But he wasn't going to let it go. He closed the notebook and stood, blocking my view of the water like a sentinel. "It's learning," he said softly. "It's not just repeating anymore, it's adapting." I felt my throat close. "Brian, listen to yourself. You sound insane." He gave a short laugh, dry and sharp. "Insane or awake? You're scared because you know I'm right." He wasn't wrong about the fear, but it wasn't just fear of what was in the lake. It was fear of him, of the way his eyes burned when he spoke, like the water had reached inside and claimed him. That whole day I stayed away from him, walking the campground, trying to distract myself. I talked to Tom and Joanne again, though I avoided bringing up the splash. I watched kids ride their bikes in circles, like their laughter cutting through the heavy weight in my chest. I kept telling myself I could just leave, drive out, find another campground where silence was truly silence. But when evening came, I was still there. I don't know if it was curiosity, stubbornness, or the pull of something darker. All I know is that when the sun sank and shadows stretched long, I found myself sitting by the shore again. I told myself I'd only listen, just once more, just enough to convince myself it was nothing. At 2:13 a.m., it came. Splash. 47 seconds later, again. And again. 3. But then, without me or Brian calling, without anything to trigger it, a fourth. This time, closer. The ripples reached the shore, lapping against the rocks at my feet. I jerked back, stumbling, heart slamming so hard I thought it might tear through my chest. The water touched the edge of the land like fingers reaching for me, and then I heard something worse than the splash. Breathing. Faint. Wet, like someone just beneath the surface exhaling bubbles. I ran back to the RV, slammed the door, locked it twice. I pressed my back against the door and stayed there until dawn. When I finally dared to step outside, Brian was gone. His van was still there, but he wasn't. His notebook lay open on the picnic table, pages fluttering in the breeze. I stood there for a long time before I picked it up. The handwriting had grown erratic. Numbers scrawled at odd angles, circles around phrases like interval narrowing and testing response. On one page, he'd written the same thing over and over, filling the entire sheet. It wants someone. My stomach turned cold. I should have left then. Packed everything and driven until the lake was nothing but a memory. But instead, I found myself staring at the water, searching for him, calling his name. No answer. By late afternoon, the ranger came through on his rounds, and I forced myself to ask if he'd seen Brian. He shook his head, unconcerned. Folks wander all the time, probably went hiking. He'll be back. But I knew better. That night, the splashes came again. Only this time there were 4. Right away. No waiting. No calling. I sat frozen in my bed, listening as the sound drew closer and closer until it felt like the water was right outside the door. My RV rocked ever so slightly, as if touched by something heavy pressing against it. And then, silence. I thought maybe it was over, that whatever was out there had left. I almost let myself breathe again. But then I heard it. Not a splash. A knock. 3 slow knocks against the side of my RV. I held my breath, every nerve in my body screaming not to move, not to make a sound. The knocks came again, lower this time, closer to the ground, as if sliding down the metal. I couldn't stop shaking. My whole body was quaking so hard the bed frame rattled beneath me. The knocks stopped, and then, faint but unmistakable, I heard Brian's voice. "Come out." I nearly screamed. It was him, but not him. His voice was warped, wet, like it was bubbling up through water, gurgling with each syllable. "Come out. It wants you." I clamped my hands over my ears, curled into myself, rocking like a child. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink, afraid that if I closed my eyes, I'd wake up in the water. When dawn finally broke, the knocks were gone. The lake was calm again, and Brian's van, empty. The ranger came back that morning, and when I told him Brian was missing, he frowned, scratched his head, and said he'd file a note. But his voice lacked urgency, like this wasn't the first time. That chilled me more than anything. I packed to leave. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to hitch the RV properly. I told myself I wouldn't look back. I couldn't. But as I pulled away, I couldn't resist one last glance in the side mirror. The lake shimmered in the morning sun, calm, beautiful, untouched. And then, behind me, faint but clear through the trees, came a single splash. The sound followed me down the road. I swear it did. Even with the RV windows rolled up, engine humming, tires thrumming over the blacktop, I could hear it in my head. That heavy, deliberate splash. At first, I told myself it was memory, an echo that would fade once I put enough miles behind me. But then, 10 miles from the campground, I stopped at a gas station to calm down, to breathe, to convince myself I'd shaken it off. The moment I stepped out, I heard it again. A splash. Not from the lake. There was no water for miles, nothing but the cracked asphalt lot and fields stretching in every direction. But the sound came clear, unmistakable from somewhere behind the RV. My blood turned to ice. I forced myself to look. There was nothing. Just the shadow of my rig stretching long in the late morning sun. Nothing that could make that noise. But when I turned back, a wet footprint marked the pavement at my feet. It wasn't mine. My breath hitched. The print was larger than mine, longer, almost stretched. Water glistened on the surface as if it had just been left, but the ground was bone dry everywhere else. I backed into the RV, slammed the door, locked it twice. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice before I managed to start the engine. My heart hammered so loud it drowned out the hum of the road as I sped away. But deep down, I knew something had changed. It wasn't tied to the lake anymore. It was tied to me. For 2 days, I drove aimlessly, stopping only to rest and refuel. I avoided campgrounds, avoided water, avoided people. I thought maybe if I kept moving, it would give up, lose track of me. But every night, the splashes came, at first faint, distant, like memory, then closer, louder. The pattern was always the same, 3 evenly spaced, then silence. A silence that waited, pressed, demanded, and now, without fail, a 4th, always the 4th. By the 3rd night, I couldn't deny it anymore. Wherever I went, it followed. Motel parking lot, truck stop, even a Walmart off the interstate, didn't matter. If I tried to sleep, the splashes came. And after the 4th, the knock. Always 3 slow knocks against the side of the RV. I didn't dare open the door. I barely dared to breathe. But the worst was the voice. It was Brian's again. Always Brian's. "Come out," he whispered, sometimes pleading, sometimes commanding, always wet, always wrong, bubbling like lungs filling with water. I stopped answering my phone. I couldn't explain it to anyone, couldn't make sense of it myself. How do you tell someone that a splash is following you? That water is chasing you down highways and empty fields? By the 5th night, I was unraveling. Sleep came in fragments, broken by jolts of panic. My body ached, my mind buzzed, and every sound around me twisted into the splash. The hiss of truck tires, the slam of a car door, even my own heartbeat, it all warped into that same rhythm. 47 seconds, 3 splashes, and the 4th. I started wondering if it was always waiting for the same thing. If Brian had been right, if it really did want someone. Maybe me. On the 7th night, I gave in to something I shouldn't have. I parked at a small rest area in Illinois, too exhausted to drive another mile. The lot was nearly empty, just a couple of semis parked at the far end. The air was heavy, humid, the kind of thickness that makes every breath taste like rain, even when the sky is clear. I lay down on the bed, eyes wide open, waiting. At 2:12 a.m. it began. Splash. 47 seconds. Splash. 47 more. Splash. Then silence. I clenched my fists, waiting for the knock, the voice, the horror I'd come to expect. But the silence stretched on too long, so long it made me sweat. Maybe it was over. Maybe I'd outrun it after all. But then, 3, I whispered. I don't even know why I said it. Maybe to prove to myself I wasn't crazy. Maybe because Brian's obsession had wormed its way into me. And the moment the word left my lips, splash. The 4th came, closer than ever, like it was inside the RV with me. My breath broke into ragged gasps. My vision swam. And then came the knock. Not against the metal siding this time, but from beneath the floor, as if something was crawling up through the undercarriage, trying to get in. I scrambled out of bed, slammed my feet into my boots, grabbed my keys. I didn't even think. I just drove. For hours I drove, until the horizon blurred into endless darkness. The knocks faded, the splashes too. But the silence that followed was worse, because I knew it wasn't gone. It was waiting. By sunrise, I found myself parked on the edge of a river, somewhere in Missouri. I hadn't meant to stop there, hadn't even realized I'd pulled off near water. But when I looked out the window and saw the current glinting in the early light, I understood. It wanted water, and I'd brought it here. I stood on the shore, staring at the river, the sound of rushing current filling my ears. For a moment, I thought maybe I could end it. Walk into the water, let it take me, give it what it wanted. Maybe that would free me. But as I took a step forward, I heard something that froze me in place. Laughter. Children's laughter. Down the bank, a family was setting up fishing gear. 2 kids chasing each other along the shore, their parents hauling tackle boxes. The realization hit me like a blow. If it wanted someone, it didn't have to be me. It could be anyone. I turned and ran back to the RV, shaking, sweating, heart slamming against my ribs. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't risk it finding someone else. So I drove again, and for the first time, I wondered if there was no escaping it. Not the lake, not the splash, not Brian's voice. Because what if it wasn't tied to the campground or even to water? What if it was tied to me? I drove until my eyes burned, until my hands cramped on the steering wheel, until the road itself blurred into a tunnel of asphalt and lines. The farther I went, the more I tried to convince myself distance would matter, that states and miles and hours could dilute whatever this was. But the truth kept pressing down, suffocating in its certainty. The splash wasn't chasing me. It was carrying me. I stopped in Oklahoma at a campground I hadn't even planned on reaching. I don't remember deciding to pull in, don't remember paying, don't remember setting up. I just remember sitting in my chair by a lake I didn't know the name of, staring out at the water with numb, hollow eyes. Water again. Always water. I should have chosen a dry place, somewhere inland, somewhere without a shoreline. But the thought had slipped past me, like the choice wasn't mine anymore. My RV had rolled here almost on its own. The lake was smaller than Monona, but deeper, the kind of depth that swallows light. The air smelled thick, mossy, and every now and then the surface shivered with a breeze that seemed to come from nowhere. I told myself not to listen, not to wait, not to give it what it wanted. But when night came, so did the splashes. I sat rigid on my bed, counting in my head. 1, 47 seconds. 2, 47 more. 3. I clenched my teeth, refused to move, refused to say anything, refused to even breathe too loud. Then silence. The waiting silence. I told myself I wouldn't break it. I told myself it only had power if I gave it mine. But the silence dragged on until it felt like it was inside me, eating at me, filling my lungs with water. And without meaning to, I whispered, 4. The splash came instantly, so loud it rattled the RV windows. And then the knock followed, not outside, not underneath, this time from the inside of the bathroom door. I froze. My mouth dried out, tongue stuck like sandpaper. I turned slowly, staring at the bathroom door, which I'd left cracked open. It was shut now. I hadn't shut it. The knock came again. 3 slow, wet thuds from the other side. Come out. Brian's voice. Closer, clearer, as if he were standing just inches away. I bolted for the driver's seat, jammed the keys in, floored the gas. The RV lurched forward, gravel spraying as I tore out of the campground like a fugitive. My hands shook so violently I could barely steer, but I didn't care. I just had to get away, had to put miles between me and that door. That voice, that splash. I didn't stop until dawn, pulling into a deserted rest stop along a stretch of highway no one seemed to use anymore. The place felt abandoned, overgrown weeds splitting through cracked pavement, a picnic table sagging under rust. I killed the engine and sat there, chest heaving, waiting for my heart to slow. It never did. Every sound around me warped into that rhythm. A crow cawed and it echoed as a splash. A branch cracked, and I flinched like it was a knock. My mind was fracturing, splitting down the middle, and I didn't know how much longer I could carry it. I thought about calling someone, my sister, maybe, telling her everything. But what could I say? Hey, I think a lake is following me. Hey, I hear splashes in places where water doesn't exist. Hey, my friend got pulled under and now he's calling from inside my RV walls. They'd lock me up. They'd medicate me. They'd never believe it. Maybe I didn't believe it either. But then I looked down at my shirt, wet. Clammy dampness soaked through the front of it, though the RV was dry, though I hadn't spilled anything. The fabric stuck to my skin, reeking faintly of algae. I stripped it off, trembling, and threw it outside. It landed in the dirt with a sick slap, heavier than it should have been. I climbed back into bed, telling myself I'd shut my eyes just for a moment, just long enough to gather strength. But when I opened them again, it wasn't morning. It wasn't night either. It was gray, a half-light, unnatural, like I'd fallen into a space between times. The RV windows were fogged with condensation, and the air smelled of lake water, thick and metallic. I sat up slowly, every nerve screaming. And then I realized the RV was moving. Not forward, not along the highway, up and down, as if floating. I stumbled to the window, wiped the fog with my sleeve, and my heart stopped. Water surrounded me. Endless black water stretching in every direction, no shoreline, no sky, no horizon. My RV bobbed like a toy boat, and beneath me something stirred. A ripple, a circle widening, and then the splash. So close it rocked the RV. I stumbled backward, fell against the counter, my breath ragged, my eyes wide. Another splash, then another, and another. No 47 seconds now. No waiting, just endless pounding splashes against the metal, shaking me, rattling me apart. Then came the voice. Not just Brian's anymore. Dozens, hundreds. Come out, come out, come out. A chorus rising from beneath the water, every voice distorted, gurgling, pulling. The bathroom door creaked open on its own, and standing there was Brian, dripping, gray-skinned, eyes black and hollow. He smiled, water spilling from his mouth. "It wants you," he whispered. I screamed, lunged for the driver's seat, turned the key, and the world snapped back. I was on the highway shoulder again, sun blazing through the windshield, the rest stop gone. The RV still, dry, silent. But the driver's seat was soaked through. My hands gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. Tears blurred my vision. I don't know how much of that was real, how much was dream, how much was whatever the splash had become. But one truth sat heavy, undeniable. It wasn't going to stop. Not until I gave it what it wanted. I didn't drive that day. Couldn't. My hands were too stiff, my chest too heavy. I sat in the RV with the curtains pulled tight, every sound outside like a test, every silence worse than the noise. The splash had shifted something in me. It wasn't about a place anymore, not about lakes or campgrounds or even the highway. It had taken root inside me like a seed planted the night Brian went under, and now it was blooming, twisting, reaching into every corner of my life. And yet, in some sick way, I could almost hear the promise in it. It wants you. Brian's words, or maybe not Brian's. Maybe the thing just wore his voice like a mask, but the meaning was the same. This wasn't random. It wasn't some cursed accident I'd stumbled into. It had chosen me. I tried to fight it with logic. I told myself trauma could do strange things, that the brain could split, fracture, replay moments until they hollowed you out. I repeated that phrase until my throat was sore. But when night fell, the rhythm began again. Splash. 47 seconds. Splash. This time I refused to count. I shoved my hands against my ears, whispered prayers I hadn't spoken in years, let the tears run freely. But when the silence came, so did the pressure. A tightening around the RV, a flexing of the walls as if something massive circled just out of sight. And then knock. Not on the door, not on the bathroom wall. This time it came from beneath my bed. I froze, every vein iced. Slowly, carefully, I leaned down, pulled the blanket edge just enough to see the dark space below. It was wet. A slow drip pooled there, forming a slick patch that smelled of rotting weeds. "Come out," whispered a voice, muffled, rising from the damp. "Come see." I bit down so hard on my lip I tasted blood, forcing myself not to answer. But the silence after was worse, the kind of silence that suggests you've made a mistake. The drip stopped. Then the mattress shifted beneath me, sagging as though someone climbed up from below. I bolted upright, heart jackhammering, slammed on the lights. And the RV was empty. Empty, but not dry. The mattress where I'd been sitting was soaked through, dark patches spreading outward, cold and slimy against my skin. I snapped. I tore the bedding off, hurled it outside, dragged everything wet out into the dirt, sheets, pillows, even my backpack. I didn't care who saw, didn't care how insane I looked. I just needed it gone, needed the stench out of my lungs, the weight off my chest. But when I stepped back inside, the floor was wet again. A thin film, no source, no leak. Just water seeping up from nowhere, coating the linoleum in a slick, glistening layer. That was the first time I screamed out loud, a raw, broken sound that ripped my throat. And when the echo died, the splash answered. Not outside, not timed, immediate, direct, as though it had been waiting for me to cry out. I drove then, blindly, without knowing where I was headed. The windshield streaked with bug guts and my own spit as I shouted into the dark, demanding it stop, demanding it leave me alone. It didn't. Every puddle on the road reflected more than the sky. Every overpass dripped like the throat of a cave. Even when I found stretches of dry land, the smell of algae followed, clinging, curling into my nose, into my hair, into the fabric of the driver's seat. I thought of Brian more in those hours than I had in years. His laugh, sharp and infectious. His way of telling stories too loud, of dragging strangers into conversations. His stubborn streak, the one that made him swim even when the storm rolled in. And I realized the sickest part of it all, I didn't just miss him. I envied him. Because he was done, he was gone, and I was still here, carrying this endless, repeating splash like an anchor I couldn't cut free. By the time dawn broke again, I'd made a decision. If it wanted me, I'd go to it. Not by accident, not dragged, on my own terms. I pulled into another campground, didn't even check the name. It had water, that was enough. A wide reservoir, flat as glass in the morning light, dragonflies skating across the surface. Families were camped nearby, kids with fishing poles, dogs chasing sticks. Normal life, bustling and safe. I envied them too. I parked as close to the water as I could, left the RV door wide open, and sat there watching the surface, waiting. I thought it would come instantly. Thought I'd step out and be swallowed in a heartbeat, but the water just shimmered in the heat, patient, pretending. So I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm here." The splash came at once, not distant, not timed. Right there at the shoreline in front of me. The kids didn't react, neither did the dogs. It was mine alone. I stood, legs shaking, and walked to the edge. The mud sucked at my shoes, warm and sticky. The reflection that looked back wasn't mine. Not fully. My face was there, but behind it another shadow leaned, black and grinning, mouth wide with teeth like broken shells. "Come out," it said, and for a moment I almost did. I leaned forward, breath catching, feeling the pull in my chest, the sweet release of letting go. Then a child's laugh snapped me back. I turned. A little boy had tripped in the grass, his mother scooping him up, kissing his scraped knee, just a moment of ordinary life, a reminder of something real, solid, untouched by the water's hunger. And I realized what it wanted wasn't just me, it wanted through me. It wanted them. That snapped something inside me harder than fear ever could. A sharp, Furious resolve. If I gave in, I wouldn't just be ending this. I'd be opening a door it could pour through, one family, one campground, one body at a time. No, not like that. Not ever. I stumbled back, mud clinging to my shoes, chest heaving. I slammed the RV door shut, drew the curtains, and sat shaking in the dark. If it wanted me, it would have to come harder. I wasn't surrendering. Not yet. The reservoir stayed behind me, but it never really left. That night the splash came faster, angrier, as if I had insulted it by walking away. No more neat 47 seconds. No more rhythm. Splash, splash, splash. Relentless. I stuffed a pillow over my head, pressed until my ears rang, but the sound cut through, sharper, louder, like it was striking the inside of my skull instead of the water outside. Then came the wait. The RV began to list, one side sinking with a groan of suspension, as though some enormous hand had pressed down on the roof. My cabinets rattled, dishes clinked, and for a terrifying moment I thought the whole rig would roll. I scrambled to the driver's seat, turned the key, floored it. Tires spit mud, engine whined, but something held me back. The RV wouldn't move. Water spilled across the windshield. Not rain, not condensation, but a sheet of black, rippling liquid pressed against the glass as if the lake itself had risen to swallow me whole. I couldn't breathe. My chest locked, hands shaking on the wheel. Then, through that shifting wall, a face appeared. Brian's. Not the way I remembered him. This face was swollen, gray, eyes pale and blind, like mouth yawning wider and wider until it filled the whole pane. "Let me in." The words rattled the frame, deeper than sound, vibrating straight through the steering column into my bones. I screamed, jammed the accelerator, felt something snap beneath the wheels. The RV lurched forward, broke free, and the water vanished like it had never been there. When I pulled over miles down the road, the windows were bone dry. The mud had sprayed high on the sides, but there was no sign of flooding, no dripping trail, nothing, except the smell. That same algae rot, thicker than ever, seeping up from the vents, clinging to the air like a curse. I left the engine running just to hear something besides the splash. But even then, it threaded through the noise, finding the cracks in the sound, reminding me it wasn't done. The next morning, I tried to act sane. I told myself if I just cleaned, if I made the space feel normal again, maybe I could ground myself. I opened every cabinet, scrubbed every surface, mopped until the floor shone. I even burned a stick of sage I'd found in a forgotten drawer, though I never believed in that sort of thing. The smoke curled in gray spirals. For a while, it almost felt peaceful. Until I noticed the footprints. Not mine. Wet prints, small as a child's, scattered across the clean floor. They began near the door, but didn't lead inside. They started in the middle of the room, as if someone had simply stepped out of water that wasn't there. And they didn't just stop. They circled, over and over, pacing in loops until the floor darkened again with moisture. I followed them with shaking eyes, tracing the spiral inward. The center was right beneath the table. I dropped to my knees, lifted the cloth that hung there, and found nothing. Just empty vinyl flooring, damp but bare. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that if I looked long enough, leaned far enough, I'd see a hand reaching up from the floorboards, waiting. That broke me. I shoved the table aside, tore open the floor hatch that led to the RV's storage compartment, and stared into the dark cavity below. Dripping, steady, from nowhere. The whole space smelled like the bottom of a drowned well. That's when I knew. It had moved in. It wasn't outside anymore. It wasn't following me campground to campground. It was here. Inside. Part of the rig, part of me. The next 2 days blurred. I didn't drive much, didn't eat much either. I sat at the tiny table, listening, waiting for the next splash, the next voice, the next face on the glass. Every few hours, something new would happen. The shower turning itself on, the faucet spitting black water, the hum of the fridge morphing into a low chant, words I couldn't understand. At night, the bed soaked again, sheets clammy against my skin no matter how many times I replaced them. Sometimes I woke choking, convinced I'd been underwater for minutes. Sometimes I woke laughing, a horrible foreign sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. By the third night, I couldn't tell if I was sleeping at all. The splash had become more than sound. It was inside me, pulsing with my heartbeat. A second rhythm, a parasite. I thought of Brian again, thought of how easily he went under, how fast it happened. Maybe he hadn't fought. Maybe he hadn't wanted to. And maybe that was the mercy of it, because fighting was hell. On the fourth night, I tried something desperate. I spoke to it. "I know you want me," I whispered into the dark, "but you can't have them. The kids, the families, the people at those campgrounds, you can't touch them. If you want me, it's just me. Understand?" Silence stretched. Then, slowly, the RV creaked. The cabinets swung open one by one. The lights flickered, buzzing like hornets. And from the sink, water began to rise, not pour, not spray, but rise, a perfect cylinder climbing against gravity. It shaped itself into a face. Brian's again. Only this time his mouth wasn't moving. Mine was. The reflection in the water spoke in my voice, cold and hollow. "They're already mine." The cylinder collapsed, splashing across the counter, soaking everything. And the smell, God, the smell was so thick it coated my tongue. I gagged, fell to my knees, and the RV rocked with laughter that didn't come from me. I knew then that refusal wasn't enough. If I kept driving, if I kept running, eventually I'd end up parked beside another family, another group of children chasing fireflies. And sooner or later, it would bleed through me into them. I couldn't allow that. I had to find a way to end it, or die trying. The decision burned through me all night. Every splash that shook the RV was a reminder. This wasn't going to end with me running. I had two choices: face it where it began, or let it rot me out from the inside until I was nothing but another drowned shadow in the reflection. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. I drove back. Mile after mile, my headlights cutting the fog, tires humming like they knew I was headed toward a place I should never have returned. The GPS tried to reroute me twice, glitching in ways it never had before, but I ignored it. My hands were stiff on the wheel, the stink of algae pressing out of the vents heavier with every passing mile. When I finally crested the hill above the reservoir, my stomach turned. The shoreline was different. Where once there had been an easy slope and gravel boat launch, now the banks had collapsed inward, jagged and slick, as though the lake had chewed through its own edges, hungrier than before. The water was higher too, lapping against the signposts that used to stand 10 feet from the shore. And though the sun was rising, the surface was black, not dark blue, not gray. Black, like oil sucking in the light. I parked close, left the engine running. The RV door creaked when I opened it, and the air outside was no better. Heavy, sour, clinging to my throat. I carried nothing with me but a flashlight and a length of nylon rope. Part of me thought maybe if I went under, if I let it take me, it would finally stop. Another part thought maybe I could fight it, drag it into the open, force it to show itself in a way I could destroy. But when I reached the water's edge, I froze. The splash came again, right at my feet. No 47 seconds, no rhythm, just immediate, violent thrashing that sent ripples across the lake. Something wanted me in. I dropped the flashlight, tied the rope around my waist, secured the other end to the RV's bumper. My heart hammered like a trapped bird. "This ends with me," I muttered, though I didn't believe it. Then I stepped in. The cold was a shock, knives biting into every nerve. I gasped, staggered, but forced myself deeper. Waist, chest, shoulders. By the time it closed over my head, the world above had disappeared entirely. No muffled sound, no shimmer of light. Just blackness pressing from every direction, swallowing me whole. My lungs seized. Panic clawed at me, demanding I surface, but some force held me down, not physical, not like hands or weeds. Something heavier, denser, like grief itself had mass. And then I saw them. Faces. Dozens, maybe hundreds, drifting in the dark. Some old, some young, all with eyes wide and mouths slack, their bodies suspended as though tied to invisible strings. Brian was among them. He reached for me, arm moving slow as syrup, lips working like he was trying to speak. But before I could read the words, another shape surged forward. Huge, formless, a shadow within shadows. Its eyes were not eyes, but holes, vast and endless, sucking even the black around them deeper. The splash. It wasn't water. It wasn't sound. It was hunger. Every 47 seconds had been its heartbeat. Every face was just bait, pieces of it trying to lure me deeper. And now it had me. My rope tightened. I jerked back, the nylon burning my waist. The RV groaned above, pulled toward the water as though the creature meant to swallow the whole vehicle to keep me. I kicked, clawed, felt my chest ripping for air. In that final moment before unconsciousness, Brian's face appeared again, inches from mine. "Don't fight it," he mouthed. But I did. I dug my fingers into the rope, yanked with every ounce of will left in me. The cord went taut, something snapped in my ribs, and suddenly I was flying upward, breaking the surface with a howl that didn't sound human. I crawled onto the bank, coughing water that wasn't water but thick black sludge like tar. The RV's bumper bent, rope frayed, metal screaming as though something below had almost dragged it in. And behind me, the lake was calm. Perfectly calm. Like nothing had ever happened. I sat there until the sun was high, shaking, soaked, broken. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to curl up and sink back into that oily dark. But neither would have changed the truth. The splash wasn't gone. It was inside me now. Every few breaths, I could feel it. Another rhythm, another pulse, rippling through my veins like it had been waiting for a new home all along. I don't know how long I have before it takes over. Maybe days, maybe hours. I only know this: when the sound comes, when the splash repeats inside my chest, I'm not just hearing it. I'm becoming it. And if I don't stop myself soon, I'll be the one pacing in the dark, circling an empty floor, waiting for the next poor camper to pull up beside me, waiting for them to hear what I hear, waiting for them to drown without ever touching water. I should have driven away that morning, should have pointed the RV anywhere but back onto the highway, let the lake fade into the rear view, buried under the dust of distance and denial. But I didn't, because the splash followed me. Not outside anymore, not against the hull of the RV, not echoing across the reservoir. It was inside. It came when I blinked, when silence wrapped too tightly around me. A wet, hollow rhythm, 47 seconds apart, throbbing in my chest like a second heartbeat. And every time it came, I felt something shift behind my eyes, like a curtain pulling back inch by inch to show me a stage I didn't want to see. By the second day, I realized it wasn't just me hearing it anymore. At a gas station off Route 32, a little girl stopped pumping her bike tires and stared at me. Her face pinched, head cocked, listening to something I couldn't hide. "Mom?" she whispered, backing away. "He's making the noise." The mother hushed her, dragging her inside, but I saw the fear. I saw how her eyes flicked to the puddle beneath my shoes, even though I hadn't walked through water. That night, I parked at a rest stop, tried to sleep, but the dream wasn't a dream at all. I was underwater again, bodies swaying around me, Brian's face closest of all. Only this time he wasn't begging or warning, he was smiling. "You brought it with you," he mouthed. I woke choking, my pillow soaked, not sweat, not drool, but black streaks that left stains no detergent could touch. I knew then I had a choice. Take myself somewhere far, vanish into the wild, wait until the splash consumed me and hope I stayed hidden when it did, or end it on my own terms. But the thing is, when it lives in your veins, in your breath, in your heart, there's no such thing as your own terms. 3 nights ago, I drove back to the reservoir one last time. The rope I had cut free still dangled from the bent bumper. The shoreline was narrower now, water higher, lapping hungrily against the gravel. I parked at the edge and sat in the driver's seat for a long time, hands on the wheel, waiting for courage or clarity or something that never came. And then I heard it, outside and inside, in sync for the first time. The splash. It shook the RV. Shook me. And I realized it wasn't asking. It wasn't luring. It was calling me home. I could have gunned the engine, driven straight in, let the lake swallow both me and the machine that had carried me this far. But I didn't, because the truth is, when it has you, it doesn't need to drag you down. You become its reflection, walking where others camp, stopping where others rest, and sooner or later, someone hears the sound. Someone like you. So if you're listening to this, alone in your rig, parked near some quiet shore, wondering if the ripples you hear are just fish or wind or the ordinary night, listen closely. Wait 47 seconds. If it comes again, don't convince yourself it's nothing. Don't let denial sink its teeth into you. Because it isn't water moving. It isn't coincidence. It isn't even outside anymore. It's waiting for a place to live. And if you aren't careful, the splash that kept repeating will be yours next. I've always believed that solitude sharpens a person, that pulling your RV down a dirt road until the last cell bar flickers and dies is a kind of test. You tell yourself you're chasing silence, chasing freedom. But when you're sitting out there with nothing but your headlights fading against black tree lines, silence begins to feel like something with teeth. It presses in. It gnaws at the edges of your mind. And if you've ever sat out in one of America's forgotten campgrounds, the kind so far removed from highways that even rangers hesitate to check them, you'll know exactly what I mean when I say that the wilderness doesn't just surround you. It stares back. The first time I felt it was deep in the Rockies, late September, when the air carries that coppery bite of coming snow. My name's David, 47 at the time, traveling solo in a battered Class C that I'd rebuilt myself after a divorce left me searching for, I don't know, distance, maybe, healing. I found myself following smaller and smaller roads until pavement turned to gravel and gravel to rutted dirt. My GPS glitched, recalculating endlessly until it simply gave up, showing nothing but green. But the site was there, marked on an old paper map I'd picked up from a gas station. Clear Hollow Camp. Clear Hollow. The name sounded harmless enough, a few pull-throughs, an old fire ring, and the cracked concrete pad of what must have once been a ranger kiosk. The forest swallowed everything else. Towering pines and aspen pressed close, their trunks pale in the dimming light. I was the only one there. The quiet should have felt freeing, but instead it wrapped around me like a band tightening across my chest. I parked, killed the engine, and stepped out into the cooling dusk. No wind, no birdsong, not even the lazy buzz of insects you expect in the mountains. Just a blank, waiting hush that made my footsteps sound intrusive. I told myself this was what I'd wanted, real isolation, the kind of silence that lets you think. But the truth? The moment I turned off that ignition, something inside me whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I unpacked anyway. Set out my camp chair, lit a small fire, and heated up a can of chili on the propane stove. The flame hissed, popping against the damp wood I'd gathered, and I kept staring into it longer than I should have, because beyond that ring of light, the forest seemed to shift. Not move exactly, but shift in the way shadows do when your eyes struggle to define them. I looked up at the tree line, and for a second, I swore the trunks weren't in the same place they'd been when I first parked. The rational part of me shoved back. Fatigue, hunger, my nerves playing tricks. But the longer I sat, the harder it was to shake the feeling that the silence wasn't empty at all. It was full. Listening. I should have left right then, but when you've spent weeks convincing yourself you're stronger alone, you don't back down just because your gut tugs at you. So I forced a chuckle, grabbed my flashlight, and did what any camper does when unease creeps in. I walked the perimeter. Shine the beam, check for wildlife, mark the edges of your little safe zone. That's when I noticed the smell. Not the clean pine and dirt scent you expect, but something wetter. Heavy, like moss left rotting under a stone. It hung low near the ground, threading through the air each time I swung the flashlight. I crouched, tried to trace it, and saw where the earth near the tree line was dark. Damp, though it hadn't rained in weeks. A thin trickle of water? No, thicker, sluggish. I followed the beam and saw that the soil wasn't just wet. It looked disturbed, clawed up almost, as though something had dragged itself from underneath. I froze. My breath fogged in the cool air, and the silence seemed to close tighter. Every instinct screamed at me to step back, but I didn't. I stood there, knees stiff, my light trembling over the ground, and then I heard it. A knock. Not sharp, not metallic. a hollow thunk that came from somewhere beyond the trees. I held still. Another knock followed, measured, deliberate, like knuckles against an old door. 3 seconds later, another, and another. The knocks moved, not closer, but around. First to my left, then behind me. I spun the flashlight in frantic arcs, but the beam caught only bark and branches. No eye shine, no movement. Just the sound, circling. I stumbled back to my fire, heart hammering so hard I thought it might rupture through my ribs. I sat down in the chair and gripped the arms until my knuckles whitened. For 30 minutes, maybe more, the knocks came and went, sometimes close enough that I swore they came from just beyond the glow of the fire, other times distant, muffled by the trees. Eventually they faded, swallowed back into the night. I didn't sleep much that first night. Every creak of the RV frame, every drip of condensation sounded amplified, distorted, like the forest was breathing with me. At one point, just past 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside. Slow, deliberate footsteps pacing near the driver's side. I clutched the hunting knife I kept by the bed, forcing myself to stay still, listening. The steps circled once, twice, then silence. Morning didn't bring relief. If anything, the light made things worse because I could see. The disturbed soil near the tree line stretched further than I'd realized, a ragged line of overturned earth leading deeper into the woods. And on the windshield of my RV, streaked across the glass, was a smear of that same dark, damp soil. 4 streaks. Vertical. Like fingers dragged downward. I stood there, stomach roiling, telling myself over and over it had to be a prank. Some sick backwoods camper messing with me. Except I'd seen no other vehicles, no footprints but my own, that no tire tracks leading into Clear Hollow. Whoever or whatever had touched my RV had come from the forest itself. Still, I stayed. That was my mistake. By midday, clouds gathered, bruised purple against the mountains. The air thickened, heavy with that same rotting smell. I tried to distract myself, hiked a short loop trail that seemed to circle back on itself, checked the fire ring, reorganized the RV pantry. But unease gnawed at me like hunger you can't satisfy. Every time I looked at the tree line, I felt watched. Not in a vague way, but targeted, like something had already marked me. That night, the knocking returned. Louder. Faster. Sometimes 2 at once, on opposite sides of the campground, as if something wanted me to know it wasn't one presence but many. I barricaded myself in the RV, pulled every curtain, turned on every light, but the sound didn't stop. It pressed in from every direction until my head throbbed with the rhythm, and then my headlights flicked on. I hadn't touched the switch. I hadn't even left the driver's seat unlocked. But from where I sat at the back of the RV, clutching the knife with both hands, I watched as the beams cut through the forest. And standing at the very edge of the light, perfectly still, was a figure. It wasn't close enough for detail, just a silhouette tall and narrow, arms dangling too low. The knock stopped the moment I saw it. Silence slammed down, heavier than before. I blinked once, twice, and the headlights shut off. Darkness. I couldn't move. My body refused. My chest ached with the effort of staying silent, of holding breath that wanted to break loose in a scream. Minutes passed. Hours, maybe. When the first hint of dawn lightened the windows, I still sat there, rigid, eyes fixed on the curtains, and that's when I realized something worse. The smear of soil on the windshield was gone, clean, as though someone had wiped it away during the night. I told myself I'd leave that morning. No sense hanging around a place that made me feel hunted. I packed up quickly, my hands fumbling over latches and cords, checking mirrors twice, 3 times. But when I slid into the driver's seat and turned the key, the RV coughed once, then died. I tried again. Nothing but the hollow click of a dead starter. The battery hadn't been weak the night before. The headlights had come on without my touch. And now, silence. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, sweat beading on my forehead though the morning air was icy. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, to run, to follow the forest road on foot until I found someone, anyone. But stepping outside meant crossing that boundary again, leaving the thin shell of fiberglass and steel that felt like my last barrier. I tried to rationalize. Maybe the battery had drained. Maybe the alternator had given out. Things break, machines fail. But in my gut, I knew. Something had wanted me stranded. By noon, the clouds swallowed the sun completely. The forest dimmed, as though evening had crept in early. I lit the propane stove inside, trying to keep myself occupied, but the moment the flame hissed to life, I heard it again, knocking. Not distant this time, not circling, directly against the RV's frame. The first knock came from the rear bumper, a dull thud that rattled the spoons in the drawer. I froze. Another followed at the side panel, just beneath the window. Then the roof. Thunk, thunk, as though something walked slowly from end to end. I wanted to scream, to throw open the door and demand whoever was out there show themselves, but my throat locked, dry as paper. Instead, I switched off the stove, sat cross-legged on the floor, and listened as the sound mapped the shape of my RV. Every wall, every corner, a deliberate exploration. When the last knock faded, silence stretched so long that I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. I dared to peer through the curtain. Nothing but trees, pale trunks swaying slightly though there was no wind, and then, from behind me, a whisper. Not outside, not muffled through walls, inside. I spun so fast I cracked my shoulder against the table, my knife already in my hand. But the RV was empty. I swept every corner, tore open the bathroom door, yanked back the curtain over the bunk. Nothing. Yet the whisper had been clear, a single word stretched and broken, like someone learning how to shape sound. Stay. My hands shook so badly I dropped the knife. I didn't pick it back up. That night I didn't dare close my eyes. I sat at the table with every light on, forcing myself to stay awake, counting each second. Midnight came. Then 1, 2. The silence pressed so thickly I thought I'd choke on it. I don't remember when exactly it happened, but sometime near dawn I must have drifted off. When I jolted awake, the lights were out. The fire extinguisher had been pulled from its mount and placed gently on the table in front of me, and in the fogged condensation of the window, 4 letters had been traced by some unseen finger. Stay. I staggered outside at first light. My legs felt hollow, like walking on stilts. The air was sharper, the smell of rot thicker, clinging to the back of my throat. I needed water, needed fresh air, needed anything that wasn't inside that suffocating box. The disturbed soil near the tree line had grown. What had been a few feet of upturned ground now stretched in a ragged semicircle, encroaching closer to where my RV sat. It looked less like something had clawed up from beneath and more like the earth itself had opened, yawning wider in the night. I knew then I couldn't stay another night. Even if the RV wouldn't start, even if it meant walking 15 miles of dirt road, I had to move. I stuffed a pack with essentials, water, jerky, flashlight, map, and slung it over my shoulder. But the moment I stepped onto the road, something shifted inside me. Not relief, not determination, it was dread. The kind that doesn't rise suddenly but seeps slow and steady like water into wood. My chest tightened with each step. The forest grew thicker, the road narrower. I walked for an hour, maybe more, but every turn looked the same. Tall trunks pressed close, branches arching overhead, shadows twisting. Finally, I stopped, turned around, and my blood ran cold. My RV sat 20 yards behind me. I don't know how I made it back. 1 second, I was staring down a road that should have carried me miles away. The next, I was back at camp, the white frame of my RV glaring between the trees like it had never moved. My pack slipped from my shoulder. I sank to my knees, dry heaving into the dirt. I didn't try again that day, didn't try again that night. I locked every door, drew every curtain, and sat curled on the floor with my hands over my ears as the knocks resumed. Louder, angrier. They pounded in unison now, shaking the cabinets, rattling the pots. My teeth clacked together with each blow. I screamed, begged them to stop, but the sound only intensified, drowning out my own voice until it felt like the whole forest was hammering against me. Then, as suddenly as it started, it ceased. Silence. I waited, trembling, afraid to breathe. And then the RV door handle rattled, slow, deliberate, as though someone tested its weight, curious how much force it would take. My heart seized. I pressed myself against the opposite wall, knife back in my grip, though I knew it was useless. The handle twisted once, twice, then fell still. For the rest of that night, nothing moved. No knocks, no whispers, no footsteps. Just silence so thick I thought my ears might rupture from the pressure. When dawn finally broke, I was still sitting there, knife clenched, eyes bloodshot and dry. I'd made up my mind. I couldn't fight this, couldn't rationalize it, couldn't survive it much longer. The only chance I had was to wait for daylight, keep walking, and not stop until I hit pavement, even if it killed me. But the forest had other plans. Because when I opened the RV door that morning, what I saw wasn't the road I'd parked on. It wasn't the cracked concrete pad of Clear Hollow Camp or the familiar line of trees. It was another campground, a different one entirely. The fire ring was newer, stones stacked neatly. The picnic table still bore carvings of initials and dates. The trees were thicker, darker, their bark slick with moss. And yet, my RV sat in the center like it had always been there. I staggered backward, gripping the doorframe. My legs wanted to give out. Somehow, the forest had shifted around me, or I'd shifted within it. Either way, I wasn't in Clear Hollow anymore. And for the first time, I realized something that chilled me more than the knocks, more than the whispers, more than the figure in the headlights. It didn't want me gone. It wanted me to stay. The new campground felt wrong in ways I couldn't explain. It wasn't just the moss-slick trees or the absence of familiar landmarks. It was the quiet, denser than before, pressing against my ears until I swore I heard my own pulse echo back at me. The air was colder here too, as if the sun couldn't quite reach through the canopy. I stepped out onto the damp ground, my boots sinking slightly, and every instinct screamed at me to get back inside. But I couldn't. If the forest was shifting me, placing me where it wanted, then hiding inside that RV was useless. I needed to understand what it wanted, why it had chosen me. I walked the perimeter again, though each step felt heavier, my body sluggish as though moving underwater. The soil near the tree line was disturbed in the same way I'd seen before, ripped up, clawed from below. Only now, the marks weren't random. They formed a rough circle around the entire clearing, enclosing me, enclosing the RV, like a boundary had been drawn overnight. I bent down, running a trembling hand across the ridges of soil, and that's when I noticed something buried in the dirt, a piece of wood, rotted and splintered, with faint paint still clinging to it. I dug it out, heart hammering, until the letters came into view. Camp Green Willow, another forgotten site, another place erased from maps but not from whatever force lingered here. The realization hit like a fist to the chest. This wasn't just Clear Hollow. It wasn't one campground. It was all of them. Every abandoned site, every forgotten patch of concrete and stone that the forest had reclaimed was part of the same thing. And somehow it had me now. I stumbled back, clutching the sign fragment when I heard it. Not the hollow knocks this time, not the whisper. Singing. Faint at first, drifting through the trees, high and lilting. A woman's voice, wordless, carrying on a tune that seemed too smooth, too even, as if the sound itself wasn't bending through branches but laid flat across the air. My stomach clenched. I'd been alone out here for days. No other vehicles. No camps set up nearby. Yet the song threaded closer, curling around my chest like a leash tugging me forward. Against every ounce of will, I followed. The trees grew denser, their bark slick, their branches arching low enough that I had to duck. The soil gave way to mud, sucking at my boots. And still, the song carried. Sweet. Hypnotic. My legs moved without permission, step after dragging step, until I broke into a small clearing. There was no singer, only a pond, round and black as glass, its surface perfectly still despite the faint wind brushing the treetops. The song stopped the moment I saw it, the silence slamming so suddenly that my ears rang. I dropped to my knees at the edge, gasping for breath as if I'd been holding it all along. And when I looked into the water, I saw myself staring back. Only it wasn't me. The reflection was taller, gaunter. Its eyes were hollow dark, its mouth slack, lips moving without sound. My reflection's hand rose, but mine didn't. I scrambled back, mud caking my palms, and the surface rippled. The image blurred, then vanished, leaving only my true reflection behind, wide-eyed, shaking, filthy. I ran. Branches whipped my face, roots snagged my ankles, but I didn't care. I tore back through the trees until the RV loomed in view. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked every latch, chest heaving so violently I thought my ribs might snap. The singing returned that night. Not distant, not drifting. Inside, it seeped from the walls, from the vents, from the very frame of the RV. Low at first, almost gentle, then rising, layering into a chorus of voices, men, women, children, all humming the same tune I'd heard at the pond. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound wasn't entering through them. It was inside my skull, vibrating against bone. And then came the words, "Stay with us." Over and over, dozens of voices weaving into one. "Stay with us. Stay with us." I screamed, begged them to stop, slammed my fists against the walls until my knuckles split. But the song only grew louder, the chant more insistent, until I collapsed to the floor, sobbing, clutching the bloodied knife against my chest. Sometime near dawn, it stopped. Silence fell so complete that for a moment I thought I'd gone deaf. My ears rang, my head throbbed, but the voices were gone. I drifted into a black, dreamless sleep. When I woke, I wasn't in the RV anymore. I lay on damp soil, staring up at a canopy of trees far taller than any I'd seen. My pack was gone. My knife was gone. And in the distance through the trunks, I saw it. A line of campfires, glowing faintly against the shadows. Not one, but dozens, stretching out in a crooked path. I stumbled toward them, body trembling with exhaustion, until I reached the first. The fire burned low, but beside it sat a chair, an old camp chair, canvas frayed, the kind you'd buy at any sporting goods store. And on the seat rested a backpack. Mine. I grabbed it, heart pounding, only to realize it wasn't quite mine. The patches sewn on the straps were different. The scratches on the metal zippers didn't match. But when I opened it, my breath caught. Inside were my things, my journal, my spare batteries, my can of chili with the dented rim. I dropped it like it had bitten me and stumbled back. Further along the crooked path, another fire burned. Another chair sat beside it, another pack waited, and even from where I stood, I could see the familiar faded logo of my own gear. Not one version, many. As though I had walked this path before, as though I had been here again and again, leaving behind fragments of myself for the next one to find. The song began again, soft, sweet, rising from the trees, coaxing me toward the line of fires. My knees buckled and I fell hard to the dirt. Tears blurred my vision, panic clawing at my throat. I wasn't the first, I wasn't the only, and maybe I wouldn't be the last. I crawled back toward the RV, dragging myself inch by inch as the fires flickered brighter, as the voices rose in their chant. "Stay with us. Stay with us." By the time I reached the door and hauled myself inside, my body was trembling so violently I could barely lock the latch. I collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The voices didn't follow, not this time. The fires stayed in the distance, their glow fading as though the forest allowed me this reprieve. But in the silence that followed, a new sound filled the RV. Breathing, slow, steady, right beside me. I turned my head and saw nothing, just the empty air. Yet the sound remained, warm against my cheek, steady as a companion's. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't surviving. I was being kept. By the fourth day, survival itself had become secondary. Food, water, warmth, those were supposed to be my concerns, but the forest didn't let me focus on them. Every time I tried to boil water or heat a meal, the knocks would return. Every time I stepped outside to collect firewood, that smell of rot thickened until it made my throat close. It was like the woods were punishing me for remembering I was human. The breathing inside the RV never left. At first it was soft, as if someone lay beside me just beyond sight. Then it grew heavier, rasping, sometimes catching like a smoker's cough. I set my phone to record one night, desperate to prove I wasn't unraveling. In the morning, I played it back. Nothing. Just silence. Not even the normal creaks of the RV. Not the sound of my shifting in bed. Just dead air, as though the place had swallowed every trace of sound except the ones I heard in my own skull. Sleep became impossible. I'd doze for minutes, maybe, before jerking awake at the sensation of someone leaning close to my ear. Sometimes I'd feel pressure at the mattress, as though weight had settled beside me. Once, in the deepest hours before dawn, I woke to the faint sound of my own voice whispering words I hadn't spoken. I stayed. By then, my reflection in the mirrors had begun to change. At first it was subtle, my eyes looking slightly off, my mouth twitching half a beat late. Then, one morning, the reflection didn't move at all. I brushed my hand over my face, blinked, leaned in close, but the man in the mirror stared blankly back, frozen. I smashed the glass with my fist, blood spilling across the sink, and left it shattered. I had to get out, even if it meant starving. I gathered supplies again, jerky, canteens, a flashlight, and resolved not to look back this time, not to trust my eyes if the road twisted or the RV reappeared. I told myself I would keep walking no matter what, and for a while it worked. The road stretched longer, straighter, the trees thinned, sunlight finally spearing through the canopy. For the first time in days, I felt hope. Then I heard them. Children. Laughter at first, high and breathless, the kind you'd hear from kids chasing each other at a campground playground. My legs slowed. The sound came from the trees, darting from one side of the road to the other. I forced myself forward, muttering, don't listen, but the laughter grew louder, and then came the words. Over here. I froze. It was a little girl's voice, clear as daylight, coming from the right side of the road. My stomach twisted. My sister had been 8 when she died in a house fire decades ago, and though I hadn't heard her voice in nearly 40 years, I would have sworn on my life that it was hers calling me now. David, over here. I broke. I stumbled off the road, crashing through underbrush, branches tearing my jacket, my flashlight swinging wild arcs. Where are you? I shouted, half sob, half plea. The laughter pulled deeper into the woods, always just ahead, always close enough to chase, but never close enough to see. I tripped, slammed hard onto my knees, mud coating my hands. The laughter stopped. The silence pressed in. And when I looked up, there was no child, no path, only stones, dozens of them, half buried, scattered in a rough circle. Not natural, placed. Each one etched with lines and symbols I didn't recognize, spirals, intersecting triangles, crude figures with arms raised. My flashlight flickered, guttered, and in the brief moments of dark between pulses, I swore I saw shapes standing among the stones. Tall, narrow, arms too long. I ran. I don't remember how I found the road again, don't remember the branches clawing my face, don't remember the way my lungs felt like they were tearing. I just know I ended up back at the RV, chest heaving, knees buckling. The door stood wide open. I hadn't left it that way. Inside, every cabinet was open, every drawer pulled out. My belongings scattered across the floor in neat, deliberate lines. Batteries lined up by size, cans stacked like towers, knives arranged in a fan shape across the table, and in the center of the floor, scrawled in that same damp soil, was a single word, stay. Something inside me cracked then. My fear twisted into rage. I screamed into the empty air, voice breaking, throat raw, what do you want from me? I hurled cans against the wall, kicked the table that had smashed what little remained of the mirror. My chest burned with fury until tears blurred everything. Silence, then faint, almost gentle, a knock. Not outside, not on the walls. From beneath me, I dropped to my knees, ear pressed against the RV floor. Another knock followed, hollow, resonant, like knuckles against wood. My body shook. Something was under me. Not outside, not circling, not whispering through the vents. Beneath, I backed against the wall, knife clutched so tightly the blade cut my palm. The knocking grew rhythmic, steady, like a heartbeat pulsing through the floor. My skin crawled. My breath came ragged. And then I heard it, scraping. Long, slow drags, as though claws raked the underside of the RV, searching for a seam, a weakness. That was the first time I screamed without words, a raw animal sound. I bolted for the door, flung it open, and staggered outside. The ground beneath the RV bulged, swelled, as though the earth itself was breathing. I stumbled back, tripping over roots, landing hard in the dirt. The soil shifted, cracked, and a dark seep rose up through it, thick as tar, smelling of rot and iron. It spread in veins, circling the RV, hemming it in. My chest tightened, my vision blurred. The forest wanted me sealed, wanted me kept. I don't know how long I lay there before the pulsing stopped, before the soil smoothed, the ground swallowing its own wounds. When I blinked my eyes clear, the RV sat silent, as though nothing had happened. But I knew better. The forest wasn't done. It was only waiting for me to break. The fifth night was when I stopped believing escape was even possible. By then, my body was worn down to bone and nerve. My throat burned from dehydration, my stomach cramped with hunger, and yet it wasn't the lack of food or water that hollowed me out. It was the waiting. Every second stretched taut with the expectation of another sound, another shift, another reminder that I was not alone and never would be again. I sat slumped in the RV, head against the wall, staring at the shattered glass of the mirror I destroyed days before. The fragments still clung to the frame like jagged teeth, and though the reflection was fractured, I could see enough of my own face to know I was unraveling. My eyes were rimmed red, my cheeks gaunt, beard ragged. But what made my stomach lurch was the piece of reflection that didn't belong. In one shard over my left shoulder there was a figure, faint, blurred, but there. A dark outline with arms too long, head tilted unnaturally to the side. I whipped around, nothing but the closed bathroom room door. I looked back. The shard was empty. That was when I stopped trusting my eyes. I closed them tight, pressing my palms into the sockets until stars burst across the darkness. I told myself not to open them again, not to look. But then I felt it, the mattress dipping behind me. Slow, heavy, the weight of someone settling onto it. My breath hitched. My whole body went rigid. And then, near my ear, a whisper like breath dragged through water. "You're almost ready." My heart slammed so hard I thought it would break my ribs. I lurched forward, scrambling out of bed, knife clenched, tears streaming down my face. "Leave me alone," I shouted into the cramped space, my voice cracked and raw. The RV groaned, its frame creaking as though settling under some invisible pressure. And then came the sound that nearly drove me mad. Laughter. Not children this time, not a single voice, but dozens, layered over one another, spilling from the vents, the cupboards, the very walls. It rose in pitch, a jagged, dissonant chorus that filled every corner of the RV. I clamped my hands over my ears, screamed, begged it to stop, but the laughter only grew louder until it drowned my own voice completely. Then it cut off, just like that. The silence that followed was worse. It pressed into me, filled the hollow spaces inside my chest. I dropped to my knees, gasping for air that wouldn't come, and that's when I heard a new sound. Something scratching. Not at the walls this time, not under the floor, inside the cupboards. I staggered up, flung one open, half expecting something to lunge at me. Nothing, just empty shelves. Then the next, empty. I opened them all, one by one, until I reached the last above the stove. And there it was, a hand. Pale. Thin. Fingers too long, nails cracked and caked with soil. It gripped the edge of the cupboard and began to pull itself out. I screamed, slammed the door shut, and backed against the wall. The cupboard rattled violently, the wood bowing outward as though the thing inside were too large for the space. I grabbed the fire extinguisher, hurled it, and the door splintered. Nothing came out. The cupboard hung broken, empty. Only a thin smear of that same dark soil remained on the wood. I collapsed into the chair, rocking, whispering to myself that it wasn't real, that none of it was real. But the soil was real. The broken door was real. The gouges in my palms where I'd clenched the knife too hard were real. And the truth I didn't want to admit was simple. I was running out of time. The forest wasn't just playing with me anymore. It was wearing me down, preparing me. The next day, the line of fires returned. Not in the distance this time, but closer. When I stepped outside, blinking against the pale daylight, I saw 3 of them flickering at the edge of the clearing. Their smoke rose in thin, straight lines that didn't bend with the breeze. I knew better than to approach, but even from here I could see the shapes beside them. Chairs, Packs, belongings that looked achingly familiar. My belongings multiplied. The chanting began again, faint and steady. Stay with us. I clutched my head, screamed until my throat tore, and bolted back into the RV. I slammed the door, locked it, and pressed my back against it, shaking. But when I turned around, I knew it didn't matter. Because my things were already inside. Neat stacks of duplicates. My boots by the door, my jacket folded on the table, my journal on the counter, and yet I was wearing the same boots, the same jacket. My journal lay in my pack by the bed. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. The copies shimmered faintly, like heat haze, then solidified. Real. I screamed and hurled them out the door one by one, but each time I turned back, more appeared. Another pair of boots, another jacket, another journal. It was endless, like the forest was spitting out versions of me, piece by piece, until the RV was choking with them. By nightfall, I could barely move. The duplicates filled every surface, crowding me against the wall. I sat trembling, knife useless in my grip as the voices rose again. Stay, stay, stay. And then through the window, I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, standing just beyond the circle of disturbed soil, tall, gaunt, arms hanging low, faces obscured in shadow. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood, waiting. I pressed my forehead against the glass, tears streaming, and whispered, "Why me?" For the first time, one of them answered, in a voice that was my own, "Because you already stayed." The duplicates vanished, the fires snuffed out, the voices silenced, but the figures remained, silent and still, surrounding the clearing like sentinels. I slid down the wall, heart thundering, and knew with a clarity sharper than fear. I hadn't just stumbled into a haunted campground. I'd stumbled into a place that kept people, a place that collected them. And sooner or later, I was going to be part of it. I tried to fight the thought, but once it took root, it consumed me. The forest wasn't hunting me the way a predator hunts prey. It was holding me, the way a jar holds an insect. I wasn't being stalked, I was being studied. And every sound, every whisper, every shadow was part of the slow breaking down process, like hands gently prying at the seams of my mind. I stopped eating. Every can of food I touched seemed to rot overnight, swelling with gas, lids bulging until they hissed foul air when cracked open. The water in my jugs grew cloudy, silt swirling as if stirred from the bottom of a swamp. I tried filtering, boiling, nothing worked. Everything I consumed made me sick. My stomach churned, my lips cracked, and the taste of soil lingered on my tongue no matter what I drank. The figures outside didn't leave. Day after day, they stood at the edge of the clearing, unmoving, patient. Sometimes they shifted, one step closer, one head tilted, but only when I blinked, never when I looked directly. It was like a game they knew I couldn't win. One night, I decided to test them. I killed the lights in the RV, crouched low and peered out through a sliver in the curtains. My breath fogged the glass as I stared. For an hour, nothing. Then, movement. One of the figures raised its arm, slow as a pendulum, and pointed directly at me. My heart stopped. I stumbled backward, tripped over the edge of the bed, and slammed my head against the wall. When I looked again, the arm was still raised, still pointing. And then another figure lifted its arm, then another, until every one of them encircling the clearing was pointing at the RV, at me. I closed the curtains and didn't open them again. Sleep became impossible, not because of the noises. They'd stopped. Not because of the whispers. They were gone too. No, the silence was worse. It stretched so long, so deep, that I felt like I'd gone deaf. I started talking to myself, whispering nonsense, just to break it. My voice was the only tether I had left to the world. But even that tether frayed, because sometimes when I spoke, another voice would finish my sentence. I'd murmur, "I can't do this anymore," and a whisper from the corner would sigh, "But you already are." I'd mutter, "I just want to go home," and the reply would come, perfectly in sync with my breath, "This is home." I smashed my journal then, ripped it page by page, hurled the shreds into the fire. If the forest wanted to copy me, to collect me, it wouldn't take my words too. But when I woke the next morning, a fresh journal sat neatly on the table. Identical leather cover, identical pen tucked inside. And when I opened it, Every page was filled with my handwriting, entries I hadn't written, entries dated months, even years into the future. Some describing days I recognized, details of my divorce, of rebuilding the RV, others describing events I couldn't fathom, trips I'd never taken, campsites I'd never seen, and worse, some described things happening right now. He smashes the journal, he rips the pages, he thinks it matters, he will wake to find it again. My stomach lurched. I hurled the book into the fire, watched the flames lick it to ash, then turned back to the table. Another journal waited there, unscorched, unopened. I screamed until my throat tore. That night, the knocking returned. Not random, not hollow, deliberate, rhythmic. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, pause, 3 knocks again. I sat frozen, knife in my lap, until I realized it was Morse code. I hadn't thought about Morse since Boy Scouts, but the pattern was clear. Over and over it tapped the same word, stay. I pressed my hands to my ears, curled into a ball, rocked until my body ached. But the knocking didn't stop. It pounded until the RV shook, until my teeth rattled in my skull. And then, just as suddenly, silence again. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped outside, knife in hand, and screamed into the trees. What do you want from me? The figures didn't move. I walked to the tree line, soil clinging wet to my boots, and pressed the knife to my palm. You want me to stay? Fine, but not like this. Not as your toy. My voice shook, but my hand didn't. If you want me, you'll have to take me. And then I slashed my hand. Blood spattered across the disturbed soil. The ground drank it up like thirst. The rot smell thickened until bile rose in my throat. For a moment, everything was still. Then the soil pulsed, once, twice, and the figures raised their arms as one, not pointing this time, beckoning. The ground split. A seam opened at my feet, dark and wet, pulsing with a sound like a heartbeat. My knees buckled. The knife fell from my hand. The smell of iron and moss rushed up, filling my lungs. And for a moment I thought it might be easier just to let go, to fall into whatever waited below. But then I heard another sound. Faint, fragile, human. David? I froze. The voice came from the road. I staggered toward it, chest burning, vision blurred. And there was a figure, a real one. Not tall, not shadowed. A man in a ranger's jacket, mud to his knees, flashlight in hand. Jesus Christ, he said, eyes wide. We've been looking for you for days. Relief crashed over me so hard I nearly collapsed. I stumbled toward him, words spilling in broken sobs. Help me, please, you have to get me out. He grabbed my arm, strong grip hauling me upright. Come on, this way. I didn't look back, not at the figures, not at the RV, not at the pulsing soil. I let him drag me into the trees, my legs barely working, my chest heaving with sobs. For the first time since I'd entered Clear Hollow, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd survived. But when we broke through to a wider path, when the ranger shone his light into my face, I froze, because the beam illuminated features I recognized. My own. I stumbled back, wrenching my arm free of his grip. The flashlight beam swung across the trees, catching nothing but gray bark and dripping moss, but I couldn't tear my eyes off his face. My face. Not a perfect match, but close enough that my gut clenched and bile rose in my throat. His hair was longer, his beard more grown in, his eyes deeper set, rimmed with exhaustion I recognized in my own reflection. Don't look at me like that, he said in my voice. I've been here longer than you. I know how this ends. I shook my head violently. You're not real. Neither are you, he replied flatly. Not anymore. The words hit harder than any knock, any whisper. I staggered against a tree, bark tearing into my palm. No, I'm alive. I drove here. I remember everything. So did I, he said, and there was such pity in his tone that my knees nearly gave. He stepped closer, boots squelching in the wet soil. We all do it first. We all think we can leave, but the truth is, the moment you stayed that first night, you became part of it. I wanted to run. My whole body screamed to run, but my legs locked, heavy as stone, as though the ground itself had claimed them. No, I whispered, shaking. I can still fight it. You already fought. You already lost. His flashlight flickered, dimmed, then died. And in the darkness between us, dozens of other lights blinked on. Flashlights, lanterns, headlamps, all circling us deeper in the woods, each one held by another figure, each one with my face. I turned in a slow circle, breath ragged. Some were older, stooped and weathered, some younger, their faces barely aged, but all of them were me. Their eyes hollow, their mouths slack, their voices rose in unison, a soft murmur that made the hair at the back of my neck stand on end. Stay with us. The trees leaned inward, branches groaning, bark splitting like the forest itself bent to their chant. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might tear from my chest. I screamed, clawed at my scalp, stumbled back toward the faint outline of the clearing. My duplicates moved with me, their circle tightening, their lights bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps. And then the ground gave way. I plunged knee-deep into soft, sucking mud, my legs locked in panic as the muck dragged me lower, up to my thighs. My doubles didn't move to help. They only watched, their chant rising louder, almost jubilant. Stay, stay, stay. I thrashed, clawed at roots, tried to pull free, but the muck clung like hands around my legs, tugging me downward. My screams tore the air, my chest burning with effort until I thought it was over, until a sound cut through the chaos. Engines, distant at first, then closer. The unmistakable growl of a truck crawling over rough terrain. My head snapped toward the road and through the trees, headlights cut through the gloom. Real headlights. Not the mocking beams of my own RV, but wide, steady, blinding. Here, I screamed. My throat shredded, but I screamed again. Here, please. The duplicates hissed in unison, a low, guttural sound. Their lights flickered, some dying out. The mud loosened just enough for me to wrench one leg free, then the other. I stumbled forward, clawing my way toward the headlights as the chant dissolved into a cacophony of snarls and whispers. I broke through the tree line just as the truck skidded to a stop. Two men in orange vests jumped out, flashlights sweeping wildly. Jesus, sir, are you all right? One shouted, running toward me. I collapsed into his arms, sobbing so hard my body convulsed. Get me out, I choked. Please, you have to get me out. They exchanged a quick glance but didn't question. One hauled me into the truck bed while the other jumped behind the wheel. Gravel spat beneath the tires as we sped down the road I'd thought didn't exist anymore. I curled into myself, eyes squeezed shut, whispering prayers I hadn't spoken since childhood. Only when the engine settled into a steady hum did I dare to look back. The forest receded in the rearview mirror, black and endless. But just at the edge of the light between the trees, I saw them. Figures lined up along the road, faces pale, arms raised in unison. My face staring back at me 100 times over. The man beside me noticed my stare. Don't look, he muttered, voice tight. That's how they keep you. I jerked my head toward him, heart leaping. You've seen them too? He didn't answer right away, just gripped the edge of the seat until his knuckles whitened. Finally, he said, We've been pulling people out of there for years. Not many make it as far as you did. A cold shiver raced down my spine. What happens to the ones who don't? He looked at me, and the answer in his eyes was enough. They stayed. The truck jolted, suspension creaking as we hit pavement. My chest loosened slightly at the feel of smooth asphalt under the wheels. Civilization couldn't be far. I clung to that thought like a lifeline until the driver spoke. Where'd you say you came from? I blinked. Clear Hollow, an old site. The driver's jaw tightened. He shook his head. Clear Hollow burned down 30 years ago. Nothing left but ash. My stomach dropped. No, I was there. The kiosk, the fire ring, it's real. I saw it. The man in the vest didn't argue. He just looked at me with the kind of pity that says arguing won't matter. I sank back against the seat, trembling. My mind clawed for explanations, hallucination, exhaustion, psychosis brought on by isolation. But deep down, I knew. Clear Hollow hadn't burned away. It had been swallowed. Like Green Willow, like every other forgotten site. Not erased, collected. And I had been part of its collection. The rest of the ride blurred. I remember the glow of town lights at the horizon, the warmth of a diner booth, the sting of hot coffee down my raw throat. But even as people crowded around me, even as voices tried to coax my story, I couldn't shake the feeling. that the forest hadn't let me go, that it had only given me enough rope to wander further into its snare. When I finally stumbled into a bathroom and looked at my reflection in the mirror above the sink, my blood ran cold because my reflection wasn't moving again. I gripped the sink so hard my knuckles went white, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself to believe the mirror was just another trick. The reflection stared back at me, slack-jawed, hollow-eyed, unmoving. My breath fogged the glass, but his didn't. My chest heaved, but his stayed still. When I finally staggered backward, nearly knocking over the paper towel dispenser, the reflection's mouth twitched into a smile. I fled the diner bathroom like a madman, nearly bowling over a waitress with a tray of coffee cups. People turned, stared. Some asked if I was all right. I didn't answer. My rescuers, the two men in orange vests, were gone. Their truck wasn't in the lot. No trace they'd ever been there at all. The night air hit me sharp and cold. Streetlights buzzed overhead, throwing pale cones onto cracked pavement, but they didn't comfort me. Shadows pooled thick between the pools of light, and every time I blinked, I swore I saw tall figures waiting there, patient as always. Watching. I stumbled down the block, past shuttered storefronts, past an empty gas station. The town looked wrong, like a set left abandoned after the actors had gone. Windows were dark, doors locked, no traffic, no music, no voices but my own ragged breathing. Even the payphone on the corner hung dead, the dial tone flat. My chest tightened. I thought I'd made it out, thought the asphalt meant safety. But this wasn't a town. It was another trap, another layer. I ducked into an alley, pressed myself against the cold brick, and tried to think. My head spun, exhaustion dragging at me, but instinct screamed one thing. Don't stop moving. If I stopped, they'd close in. I followed the alley until it spat me into a back street. There, under a flickering lamp, sat my RV. My knees nearly gave. I wanted to collapse, to claw my face raw at the sight of it. The same dented bumper, the same cracked skylight, the same mud smeared across the side in long finger-like streaks. I'd left it behind, buried in the clearing, swallowed by the forest. Yet here it was, waiting. The door hung open. I couldn't. Every part of me screamed not to go near it. But the street around me stretched empty, the shadows thickening, the figures already beginning to shift at the edge of the light. My choices narrowed to one. I climbed inside. The air hit me like a fist, damp, cloying, heavy with the stink of rot. My boots squelched against soil spread across the floor, dark and wet, as though the earth itself had crawled in to claim the space. My belongings sat where I'd left them. My knife on the table, my jacket draped across the chair, but dust coated everything, thick as if decades had passed. And there, on the bed, lay another version of me. Eyes closed, chest still, skin gray, cracked, caked with the same soil that stained the floor. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat as the corpse's mouth opened in a slow, dry creak. "Stay," it rasped. I screamed and bolted out the door, stumbling down the street. My lungs burned, my legs barely carried me, but I ran until the buildings thinned, until the cracked pavement gave way to gravel again. The forest rose to meet me, trees arching overhead, shadows swallowing the sky. I collapsed against a stump, chest heaving. I didn't know where I was anymore, if I'd ever really left. My mind clawed for logic, for some anchor to cling to, but nothing held. Time slipped. Place slipped. Even memory felt like it was being rewritten as I lived it. That's when I heard the truck again. Engines rumbling low, headlights cutting through the trees. Relief flared so violently it hurt. I staggered upright, waving my arms, shouting hoarsely for help. The beams grew brighter, washing me out. The truck skidded to a stop. A door slammed, and the man who stepped out was me. Not the gaunt version I'd seen in the woods, not the corpse in the RV. This one was clean-shaven, healthier, younger by years. He smiled at me like a brother reunited. "Finally," he said, opening his arms. "I've been waiting for you." I backed away, shaking my head until tears blurred my vision. "No, no more. You're not me. You're not real." "But I am," he said, stepping closer. His eyes glistened, alive, too alive. "We all are. Every piece you've left behind, every night you stayed, every scream you gave them, it built us. You don't understand. You're not surviving, you're multiplying. Behind him, doors opened. More figures stepped out of the truck, one by one, each carrying a lantern. All of them me. A dozen versions, all different ages, all with the same eyes. I turned and ran, branches tearing my face, lungs on fire. The forest swallowed me whole, shadows bending, soil sucking at my boots. Behind me, voices called out, my voices blending into a chorus that chased me through the trees. Stay, stay, stay. I don't remember how long I ran. Hours, maybe days. My body moved beyond exhaustion, my mind frayed to threads. Every time I thought I'd reached the edge, the trees bent back, spitting me into another clearing, another forgotten campsite. Fire rings, broken tables, stone circles etched with spirals I didn't understand. Every one of them waiting. Every one of them already knowing my name. I collapsed at last in a clearing I didn't recognize. My chest seized, my vision tunneled, and when I lifted my head, I wasn't alone. A circle of them surrounded me, figures tall and gaunt, faces obscured, arms dangling low. Behind them, a wider ring of duplicates, every version of myself I'd seen. Corpses, rangers, younger, older, all of them watching. The gaunt figures stepped closer. The duplicates whispered as one. My body refused to move. My mind screamed, but my mouth only shaped one word. Over and over, stay, and the forest listened. The circle closed around me, the gaunt figures moving with a slowness that made my skin crawl. They didn't lunge, didn't rush, because they didn't need to. I was already theirs. Their patience was more terrifying than any sudden attack. They had all the time in the world, and I had none left. My knees buckled. I pressed my palms to the soil, dampness seeping into my skin, and it felt alive, warm, pulsing faintly, like flesh stretched too thin over bone. I gagged, tried to push back, but hands, my own hands, grabbed me. Dozens of them. The duplicates stepped from the second circle, their fingers digging into my shoulders, my arms, my hair. The weight of their touch was unbearable, clammy and unyielding, like being held by wax mannequins that breathed. I screamed. The sound echoed wrong, bouncing back from the trees as though the forest mocked me with my own voice. The gaunt figures leaned closer, their faces still hidden in shadow, though I knew, if I looked directly, I'd see nothing but my own reflection staring back. They raised their arms in unison, and the duplicates forced me upright. My body dangled between them, my legs barely working, my chest convulsing with sobs. Then the chanting began. Low at first, a murmur that rolled like wind through leaves, then louder, stronger, until it shook the very air. Stay, stay, stay. I thrashed, kicked, bit at the hands holding me, but it was useless. Every movement only birthed another pair of hands, another version of me pulling tighter. My own strength turned against me, my own voice drowned me out. The soil split beneath my boots, widening into a gash that pulsed like an open wound. The stench of rot and iron burst upwards, searing my nostrils. Black liquid bubbled in the fissure, thick and tar-like, glistening as though lit from within. They wanted me to fall. No, I screamed, though the word barely left my throat. I won't. The duplicates didn't listen. Their grip tightened, hauling me toward the opening. My feet dragged, toes slipping over the edge of the wound in the earth. Heat rose from it, suffocating, carrying whispers that clawed at my sanity. We are you. You are us. Stay. I was seconds away from giving in, seconds from tumbling into that pit, when something snapped inside me. Rage, raw and white-hot, boiled up from the same place despair had been festering. I wasn't going to die begging. I wasn't going to be another husk in their collection. I wrenched my head forward and slammed it into the face of the duplicate closest to me. Bone cracked, blood splattered. He fell back, clutching his nose, and the others faltered for a split second. Enough. I tore free, lunging toward the fissure not to fall, but to grab the knife I saw gleaming at its edge. My knife. The same one I dropped days ago. My hand wrapped around the hilt, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something real. Solid. Mine. The duplicates shrieked in unison, voices breaking into static like a radio dial turned too fast. The gaunt figures stepped back, their arms lowering, the chanting fractured. I slashed wildly, screaming, cutting through air and shadow alike. The duplicates fell away, not bleeding, not dying, just dissolving, their forms crumbling into soil that hissed and steamed where it landed. I swung until my arms burned, until the fissure itself began to collapse, sucking its own black liquid back into the earth with a sound like drowning lungs. And then, silence. The clearing was empty. No duplicates. No gaunt figures. Just me, trembling, knife slick with dirt and sweat, chest heaving like a bellows. The fissure sealed with a final hiss, leaving only damp soil behind. I fell to my knees, choking on sobs that tasted like blood. For a long time, I stayed there, waiting for the forest to shift again, waiting for the chant to rise. But nothing came. The silence held. Finally, with a strength I didn't believe I had, I stood. My legs wobbled, my vision blurred, but I moved. Step after step, I staggered toward the tree line. The road appeared, thin and crooked, stretching into the distance. I walked. Hours passed, or minutes. Time had no meaning anymore. But eventually the trees thinned, the air lightened, and there, at the horizon, I saw it. Pavement. Real, solid, sun-baked asphalt. A highway. I fell to my knees again, laughter tearing from my throat, wild and broken. Cars roared past, real cars with real drivers who glanced at me like I was some vagrant crawling from the woods. None stopped, but it didn't matter. I was out. I staggered along the shoulder until a semi slowed, horn blaring, and the driver leaned out, shouting if I needed help. I collapsed into tears, nodding so hard my neck ached. He pulled over, hauled me into the cab, and shoved a bottle of water into my hands. "You look like hell," he muttered, glancing at me with suspicion. "Where'd you come from?" I opened my mouth to answer. To tell him about Clear Hollow, about Green Willow, about the forest that wouldn't let me go. But when the words formed, they weren't mine. They were in his voice. "Nowhere," I said, smiling with a mouth that didn't feel like mine. "I've been here all along." The driver stiffened. I caught his reflection in the side mirror, eyes wide, lips parting in confusion, and behind him, in the glass, my reflection grinned. The truck cab rattled as the driver gunned it down the highway, but all I could hear was the sound of my own voice echoing inside me, layered, multiplied, like a chorus that wouldn't shut up. I tried to sip the water, but it tasted wrong, muddy, metallic, thick, as though I were drinking straight from the fissure in the clearing. My stomach lurched, and I shoved the bottle away. The driver kept glancing at me, suspicion etched deep into his face. "You sure you're all right? You look like you crawled out of the grave." I wanted to laugh at that, but the sound caught in my throat. I stared out the windshield instead, the white lines of the road blurring into one endless ribbon. It should have been comforting, proof that I had escaped the endless loops of dirt and moss. But the more I watched, the more I realized the lines weren't changing. The same cracks appeared again and again, the same skid marks, the same curve. We weren't moving forward at all. My chest tightened. I turned to the driver, but before I could speak, I saw it, the shadow in the reflection of his eyes. Not quite. Something stretched thinner, taller, arms dangling too long. My gut clenched as I realized he wasn't driving me anywhere. He wasn't even real. I grabbed the door handle, ready to fling myself into the rushing dark when the truck lurched. Tires screeched. The driver cursed, jerking the wheel. I slammed into the dashboard as the rig skidded to a stop. When I lifted my head, dazed, I saw what had forced him to brake. My RV. Sitting in the middle of the highway, lights off, door open, waiting. "No," I whispered, shaking my head until my vision blurred. "No, no, no." The driver turned to me, face pale, lips trembling. "What the hell is this?" But when I looked closer, his features began to shift. His nose stretched, his eyes hollowed, his mouth sagged. Within seconds, he wasn't the driver anymore. He was me. I screamed and flung the door open, tumbling onto the asphalt. My palms scraped raw, my knees split open, but I scrambled to my feet and ran. The highway stretched endless in both directions. No lights, no cars, just me and the RV squatting like a predator in the road. Behind me, the truck and its driver dissolved, crumbling into soil that hissed and steamed on the pavement. The stench of rot rushed up, suffocating me, chasing me forward. I ran past the RV without looking inside. I couldn't. If I did, I knew I'd see another corpse of myself lying on that bed, waiting for me to accept it. The highway went on forever. My lungs tore with every breath. My legs shook with exhaustion, but I couldn't stop. Every time I glanced back, the RV was there again, 50 feet behind, door open, silent. It followed me like a shadow, no matter how far I ran. At last, when my body gave out, I collapsed onto the shoulder, chest heaving, blood streaming from my knees. I rolled onto my back, staring at the stars. For a fleeting second, I let myself believe they were real, that I was outside the forest, under a sky that belonged to me again. Then one of the stars blinked. It wasn't a star, it was a lantern. More lights followed, winking on one by one, outlining the trees that had silently crept back to surround the highway. The forest had closed in again. I wasn't out. I had never left. The chant began, soft as breath, "Stay with us." I sobbed, clawing at the asphalt until my nails split. "I don't want to stay," I begged. "Please, I just want to go home." And for the first time, the forest answered. There is no home, only here. The road cracked beneath me, seams spreading like veins. Soil bubbled up, black and slick, swallowing the white lines of the highway. My RV appeared ahead again, closer this time, headlights flaring on. In the glare, I saw them. Rows of figures, hundreds of them, all with my face. Every age, every version, every failure. Their mouths opened in unison. You already stayed. The fissure yawned open beneath me. Heat seared my skin. My body slipped toward it, dragged by hands that clawed from the earth, my own hands pale and soil slick. I fought, screamed, dug at the asphalt, but it crumbled like ash. The black liquid rose, wrapping my legs, crawling up my chest, pulling me down inch by inch. I threw my head back, choking on the stench, and in the split second before the dark consumed me, I saw the highway vanish. The diner, the truck, the town. All of it peeled away like paper, leaving only the clearing. The same clearing where it had started, the same trees, the same soil, the same silence. I was back at Clear Hollow, back where I'd always been. And my RV sat waiting, door open, lights glowing warm and inviting. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My throat moved, but another voice spoke for me, calm, steady, in perfect unison with the others. Stay. And I did. When I opened my eyes again, I was sitting at the small table inside the RV. Morning light filtered weakly through the curtains, catching on the dust motes drifting in the air. A mug of coffee steamed in front of me, the same brand I always bought, the same chipped ceramic mug I'd carried for years. For a moment, it felt almost normal. For a moment, I almost believed it had all been a nightmare, but the silence gave it away. The forest outside wasn't alive with morning birds or rustling leaves. It was heavy, absolute, pressing into the RV like a physical weight. And when I wrapped my hands around the mug, the coffee was cold. I set it down, heart hammering, and forced myself to move. My body obeyed too easily, too smoothly, like it wasn't mine at all. I staggered to the bathroom, gripped the sink, and looked into the cracked mirror. My reflection smiled back. Not me, not my movements. The smile stretched wider, until the glass itself splintered under the strain. I stumbled back, knocking over the door. The shards rained onto the floor, and every jagged piece showed another face. My face. Hundreds of them, all grinning, all mouthing the same word. Stay. I screamed and hurled myself against the door, spilling out into the clearing. The RV loomed behind me, silent, patient, its door still yawning wide like the mouth of some beast. I turned in circles, chest heaving, desperate for an exit, but the trees pressed close, trunks pale as bone, no road, no path, just the same circle of disturbed soil enclosing me again. The ground pulsed. I fell to my knees, clutching my head. The whispers rose from the dirt, curling through my ears like smoke. We are you. You are us. Stay with us forever. And then the visions came. I saw every forgotten campground across the country, overgrown fire rings in Colorado, moss-slick kiosks in Oregon, collapsed cabins in Tennessee. I saw the faces of those who had camped there and never left. Their reflections swallowed, their voices stolen, all of them layered over mine, all of them chanting in unison. I saw myself too, not just here, everywhere. sitting at campfires in dozens of places at once, walking roads that never ended, staring into mirrors that never reflected true. 100 versions of me, all trapped, all smiling, all whispering, "Stay." My chest caved under the weight of it. My lungs seized as though the forest pressed roots into my ribs. I wanted to claw my skin off, tear myself apart, anything to be free of the hundreds of me's rattling inside my skull. But then something shifted. The chanting faltered, just for a second. A flicker. A pause. And in that gap, I heard my own voice. My real one. Small. Fragile. Trembling from somewhere deep inside. I don't want to stay. It was barely more than a thought, but it broke the rhythm. The figures surrounding the clearing jerked, their movements stuttering like a broken film reel. The duplicates in the soil twitched, their mouths opening and closing without sound. Hope ignited like fire in my chest. I staggered to my feet, throat raw, and screamed it louder. "I don't want to stay!" The forest howled. The trees bent inward, branches snapping. The soil cracked open again, black liquid surging upward. The figures shrieked, voices fracturing into static. My duplicates clawed at their faces, tearing at their skin, crumbling into ash. I ran. No road appeared, no town, no diner, no truck, only trees. But I ran anyway, tearing through the branches, tripping over roots, lungs ripping with every breath. The chant tried to rise again, broken, faltering, "Stay, stay." But I drowned it out with my own voice. "I will not stay." I roared until my throat bled. The forest split. Light speared through the canopy, blinding, searing my eyes. I stumbled into it, body convulsing, vision shattering into white. For a moment, I thought I was dying. For a moment, I welcomed it. Then, silence. When my vision cleared, I was standing on the side of a real highway. Cars roared past, horns blaring. The sun was high, hot on my face, sweat dripping into my eyes. Behind me, the forest stood still, ordinary, no different than any other stretch of American woodland. I collapsed to my knees, sobbing. Drivers slowed, stared, but kept moving. Eventually, a patrol car pulled over, the officer rushing to my side. His voice was firm, concerned. "Sir, are you all right? Where did you come from?" I opened my mouth. For a heartbeat, nothing came. Then, with every ounce of will left in me, I whispered, "Clear Hollow." The officer frowned. "Clear Hollow, son. That place burned down 30 years ago." I laughed then. A broken, ragged sound. Because of course it had. Because it always had. Because maybe the truth was I'd never left at all. But for now, at least, I was outside. For now, I was breathing real air, standing on real pavement. For now, I had survived. And yet, even as the officer helped me to my feet, even as he guided me into the car, I couldn't stop glancing at the side mirror. Because in its reflection, my face wasn't mine. The patrol car hummed steadily along the 2-lane highway, the world outside a blur of golden fields and distant hills. It should have felt safe, like I'd been delivered back into the ordinary pulse of America's backroads. But I sat stiff in the seat, hands clamped against my thighs, unable to shake the sense that none of this was real. The officer talked as he drove, his voice a calm murmur. Something about getting me checked at the nearest hospital, about dehydration, shock. I nodded when I thought I should, but the words washed past me. My gaze stayed fixed on the side mirror. Every time I dared to glance, my reflection lagged half a second behind. If I blinked, it stared longer. If I turned my head, it smiled faintly, as though amused by my panic. The longer I stared, the clearer it became. I wasn't the only one in this seat. Something else had come with me. At the hospital, fluorescent lights stung my eyes. Nurses clipped monitors to my chest, slid needles into my arm, spoke in voices that seemed far too normal for what I'd endured. I tried to explain, to tell them about the campground, the duplicates, the chant. They exchanged quick looks over my head, scribbled notes on clipboards, adjusted my IV. Trauma, they said softly, stress, isolation sickness. But when they left me alone in the room, I saw muddy footprints by the door. 4 streaks, dragged downward, like fingers on glass. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the soil pulse beneath me, felt the chant curl around my skull. And when I finally drifted into a thin, shallow doze, I woke to the sound of knocking. Not outside the hospital room, not at the door, from beneath the bed. I pressed the call button, begging the nurse to move me. She came, kind and patient, but when she leaned close, her whisper froze my blood. "You already stayed." Her smile was mine. I left the hospital the next morning, papers unsigned, gown still tied loose around me. I walked until I found a bus stop, rode until I reached a small motel on the edge of nowhere. The room smelled of bleach and mildew, but at least it was mine. Or so I told myself. I pulled the curtains tight, sat at the desk, opened the fresh journal they'd given me at the hospital for processing. I gripped the pen and forced the words onto the page. My words. My story. If I could write it down, maybe I could anchor myself. Maybe I could prove I was still me. But the pages filled too fast. Whole paragraphs appeared without my hand moving. The letters were mine, the voice was mine, but the sentences weren't. He thinks he escaped. He thinks this is the end. But the forest is patient. It always was. It always will be. He is already staying. I slammed the book shut, chest heaving. My hands shook as I shoved it into the dresser drawer. But when I looked back at the desk, another journal sat waiting. Identical. Blank. That was when I understood. There is no leaving. There never was. The forest isn't just soil and trees. It's the silence, the reflections, the echoes in your own voice when no one else is around. It's the space between breaths when you think you're alone. And once it's marked you, you carry it, wherever you go. Maybe you felt it too. On some lonely road, when the headlights die and the map won't load. At some forgotten campground, when the fire burns low and the trees lean in too close. That prickle at the back of your neck, that whisper you tell yourself was the wind. That's how it begins. I thought my test was isolation. That if I was strong enough, stubborn enough, I could face solitude and come out clean. But I was wrong. The test wasn't survival. The test was surrender, and I failed. Now, every reflection reminds me. Every silence grows too deep. Every night I hear it, the faint knocking, patient, rhythmic, promising it hasn't forgotten me. Stay with us. And sometimes when I wake in the dark, I don't know if I'm in a motel, a hospital, or the RV. Sometimes I think I never left Clear Hollow at all, that I'm still sitting there, staring into the fire as the forest shifts around me, waiting for me to finally accept what it's been telling me from the start, that I was never meant to leave, that none of us are. So if you find yourself driving further than you should, if your map fails and the road leads you to a place that isn't on any GPS, if the silence feels heavy and the soil looks disturbed, turn back. Don't unpack. Don't light your fire. Don't wait for the knocks to start. Because once you stay that first night, you're already theirs. And the forest never lets go.